On the continent of Ares there reigned the greatest king of them all, King Mars, yet his court was packed with nothing but psychopaths, and despite it all, he stayed unbeaten right up until the day he died, when the people of the land finally gave him a name worthy of his legend: the Mad King Mars. Legend says his last words right before he died were brutally simple. He refused to eat anything that disgusting, and that's exactly where the whole story kicks off. An attendant darted over with food, but Mars didn't even look. He said he had no appetite right then and waved the attendant away. His name was Mars, prince of a tiny kingdom tucked away in the farthest corner of the Ares continent. As a prince, everyone would assume he ate like royalty, silk-soft luxuries and meals fit for legends, but the truth hit like a punch. His life was nothing like that. At that exact moment, Mars was chowing down on monster meat, just to stay alive. To stay alive, he had to tear out of the castle and hunt monsters deep in the forest. He had to lean on that meat as his only safe meal, even though the castle kept churning out endless food for a prince, because most of it was poisoned thanks to Gamras. The prime minister ruled like a hidden tyrant, and for reasons nobody ever explained, he decided Mars was the problem that had to vanish, hunting assassination after assassination. And even when Mars cooked the monster meat, it still tasted like punishment, rough, bitter, and awful, yet he had to swallow it anyway just to stay alive, while one chilling question kept clawing at his thoughts. How much longer would he be forced to endure this? Right before he could take the next bite, a mysterious girl popped up behind him out of nowhere, so sudden it made his skin crawl, and she looked him straight in the eye, saying she was determined to make him her pupil. Mars jolted backward, yanked his sword out fast, and scanned for danger, because she'd shown up out of nowhere and he hadn't sensed her at all. The girl just stood there, calm as ever, and told him he still had a lot to learn, then added that he had real, clear potential. Then she slammed the truth down: he was worthy to take up her blade. Mars demanded proof for that wild claim, completely stunned that she could reach such an answer. The girl flashed a quick, teasing smile. To her, it was crystal clear: he was worth trusting because he'd been chowing down on monster meat like it was nothing. Mars blinked in mild confusion, trying to wrap his head around what he'd just been told. The girl said that if a human chowed down on monster meat, they'd slowly steal the monster's strength, but it takes forever. She also made it clear the stuff tastes awful and hits you with poison at the same time, so normal people would never touch it. And as Mars listened, he couldn't help but wonder who she was and why she was talking like this. Mars admitted that the first few times he chomped monster meat, he vomited, but at least it was safer than the poisoned meals that killed the poison tester who was supposed to sample his food, and the girl just stared, totally lost at the idea that the tester was gone. Even though it should have stayed locked inside the kingdom, Mars spilled the whole truth to her. He was a prince. He told her his mother died and his father, the king, never once protected him. With the throne fight tearing everything apart, Mars had become a prime target for assassins, and poison had slipped into nearly every meal served to him in the castle. Then the girl pushed the question: was he eating monster meat because he was trying to dodge the poison they were feeding him? She also warned that the monster meat was poisonous to the core, and Mars snapped back: it's not that bad. Once he'd adjusted, it wouldn't kill him, though yeah, the taste still made him cringe. In Mars's head, she was basically brushing off his whole situation with zero sympathy, and her attitude felt rude, but somehow it also helped. Then she pointed out the wild part: that he'd actually learned to live with it made him pretty remarkable. Then she snapped that if he was still scared of poison, he had a long road ahead, right when she pitched something straight at Mars like it was a challenge. Mars demanded what it was, and even from his stance it looked downright ominous. Still, he squeezed out his gratitude. Mars snapped that she was handing something like that to a total stranger, and he couldn't shake the feeling. Why would she go that far? Then he demanded to know who she really was, and the girl finally answered, introducing herself as Cassandra. Mars kept saying Cassandra, and his eyes widened as the truth finally clicked. Was this the Cassandra, the one people called the Red Demon with the sword? Cassandra confirmed, yeah, that's the name folks used for her, even if she hated it. The Red Demon, also called the Beast, was a battle-crazed sword saint who'd carved through dragons and even evil gods. And when Mars pictured her handing him a ring, a sly smile spread across his face like he'd just realized he was about to get a monster of a magic item. And if Cassandra really agreed to take him as her pupil, then finally, he wouldn't have to keep fearing assassination attempts. Right when that hope filled the air, he slipped the ring onto his finger, and the instant it clicked in place, Cassandra snapped the truth. It wasn't a blessing at all, it was cursed, and it would poison whoever wore it. The second he heard it, his mood snapped. Cassandra said this was the master's first test for a pupil, so she fully expected him to fight through and beat the poison sealed inside the ring. Soon after, a brutal pinch squeezed his throat and Mars instantly panicked. His mind flashed to one terrifying thought. What if I die? Cassandra strolled right up, cool as ice, and snapped that using items to handle a simple poison was pathetic, then demanded he prove he could overpower the poison creeping out of the ring. She told him poison resistance isn't magic, it's earned by beating poison itself, and then she warned him, Mars won't ever pry that ring off unless he conquers the poison or dies to it. She swore that a normal person would drop dead in seconds, but if you regularly ate monster meat, you could actually fight it off. Mars snapped to attention the moment he realized Cassandra was dangerous, and that hit became his very first clear warning that she was going to be his master. She forced him to wear a poisonous object, while he'd been desperately trying to dodge poison the whole time, and the whole thing felt like a cruel joke. Meanwhile, deep inside the castle, an old man studied Mars and shook his head. No healing would touch that poison, and even cure magic couldn't make it budge. Mars lay half dead for 3 days and 3 nights, barely hanging onto life. Every doctor who tried to heal him eventually threw up their hands when the poison wouldn't budge, and the whole castle started whispering that Mars was finished, until somehow, against all odds, he survived. After he finally recovered, everyone around him showered him with praise for surviving the poison. Yet nobody batted an eye at the fact that someone had even tried to poison him in the first place. Mars' father hit him with one harsh truth: if he wanted to stay safe, it was on him, no one else. And yeah, in Mars' head, that was a crazy thing to hear right after he finally pulled through. Still, deep down, he couldn't deny it either. This poisoning was 100% his own doing. Once Mars finally got his strength back, he took a bite of the food they served him, sure it was laced with poison, then nothing happened at all. He froze, stunned, like the universe had just lied to his fear. The poison's effects shifted, like something inside him just snapped and turned. Mars finally realized he didn't feel sick at all, and in that instant he knew he'd beaten the poison for good. Mars was back to normal meals, and you could tell it wasn't easy, because the resistance he'd forged against poison had paid off big time. One night he slipped into the forest and told Cassandra, his master, that he'd finally conquered the poison. No stumble, no failure. Cassandra didn't even flinch. She acted like she'd known all along. With that curse gone, he didn't have to fear deadly poison anymore, and Mars felt real, heartfelt gratitude burning in his chest. Right after that, Cassandra dropped something on the ground and told him she was handing it to him, bracelets packed with gravity magic. The moment he put them on, they'd slam his body weight double. And just like that, Mars' gut started screaming that Cassandra wasn't helping, she was trying to kill him. The last trial definitely wasn't the finish line, so Cassandra leaned in and asked if he was still chowing down monster meat. Mars admitted he hadn't touched it in about a week. Now that the poison worry was gone, he figured he had zero reason to keep eating it. Then he muttered the real fear: maybe quitting was the wrong move. Cassandra didn't give him an answer. She strode off and told him to stay right where he stood. When she came back, she hauled in the dead body of a monster. She flicked a chunk of the monster's meat toward Mars, leaned in and ordered him to eat it, because that creature was a massive basilisk. Cassandra said if Mars really had conquered the poison from that ring, then he'd be able to chow down on the meat too, and she warned that this monster was almost unheard of, even though the meat was still totally raw. Mars couldn't help but wonder if he could cook it first, but Cassandra shut him down hard, saying cooking would ruin the meat's effectiveness, so with a reluctant sigh, Mars started eating it. That taste hit him like a punch, nearly sending him over the edge, and then the terrifying thought slammed in. Maybe this was finally it, maybe this would be the thing that killed him. Cassandra leaned in and pressed him to force it down. With a brutal shove, he forced it down, then instantly buckled to his knees, fighting to stay standing as he demanded, "Is the meat itself poisonous?" Cassandra didn't hesitate. She confirmed it to the bone, and then warned that the tougher the monster gets, the deadlier its meat turns for humans. She joked that dragon meat would poison you instantly, then swore the great basilisk meat was probably the toughest Mars could survive right now, because even one lick could drop 500 grown adults dead. Mars realized Cassandra was completely unhinged, shoved the thought down, and figured this had to be where the nightmare ended, at least for today. Cassandra snapped an order for him to finish every last bite of meat, but Mars balked. There was no way anyone could stomach that much. She took his hesitation as pure confidence, then pressed him to prove he was tough enough now to skip monster meat. Then she shoved him closer, daring him to prove himself by swinging that sword at her. So Mars snapped in shock when Cassandra didn't even bother to draw her own blade, and a nasty thought hit him. She must be looking down on him. Still, he couldn't back down. He surged forward and slammed into her with everything he had. Cassandra snapped back with a brutal kick. One hit and Mars rocketed away like he'd been launched. She strode up to him, cool as ice, and snapped that he was still too weak. Clearly he needed more monster meat. No warning, no pause, she shoved the meat into his mouth and made him keep chewing. Hours could have passed, but eventually Mars swallowed the last bite, tears streaming down his face the whole time. From that moment on, the grind never stopped. Mars spent his days devouring monster meat and hammering his sword skills under his master's watch. Even though they only crossed paths once a week, Cassandra watched his progress like a hawk, so closely she could instantly tell if he was improving fast enough. Whenever Mars tried to dodge monster meat, Cassandra grabbed him and made him swallow it, no excuses. And if he slacked off on sword training, she tore into him with brutal beatdowns. Soon, his lessons didn't just focus on blades anymore, they flipped straight into monster fighting, all while he kept eating them. Still, Cassandra insisted he take on only the weak monsters solo, so she hunted for foes Mars could barely crack, a heartbeat from victory. Out of every monster he faced, Cassandra stayed the deadliest of the bunch. Still, as Cassandra and Mars sparred, she clocked how much stronger he was getting, then shoved him into the fight again and dared him to try killing her. Cassandra had a dangerous battle gift. She could restrain her power just enough to keep Mars alive, even while she struck, and her lightning-fast moves were so quick that Mars' own body often couldn't keep up. After 3 brutal years of training, everything finally clicked. Cassandra watched Mars start to get it. In that grind, Mars learned to sniff out other people and dodge incoming blows, while his survival instincts sharpened into pure instinct, all fueled by one goal: don't get hit by Cassandra. Looking back, the 3 years Mars spent training under his master felt like straight-up torture. Sure, fighting Cassandra or smashing monsters was brutal, but those castle assassins? That was a joke. Then one day, Cassandra finally let Mars face a massive wyvern that crashed down from the sky. A beast screamed through the sky, then it dove straight at him, right when Mars slammed in with a brutal strike, splitting the wyvern into scattered pieces. Cassandra lit up with pride when she saw Mars really bring down that wyvern. Sure, it wasn't as monstrous as a dragon, but it was still a brutal fight, and Mars absolutely crushed it, proving just how much stronger he'd become. Cassandra clocked that Mars had somehow gotten used to chomping monster meat, and when she asked, he admitted he'd been eating it every single day. So Cassandra told him that leveling up like that was a good sign, and Mars nodded right along. Cassandra broke into a smile and told him, straight to his face, that she had nothing left to teach him. She shoved the truth into his face: keep training, or the next time we meet, I'll end you for real if I catch you slacking. Then she turned and walked off, leaving him behind with his 3-year master just disappearing into the distance. Only after it was all said and done did Mars finally realize the one mistake that never crossed his mind. He never asked where she lived. She didn't feel like the type to sit still at all. She seemed like the kind who roamed the world, hunting for brutal, powerful enemies to clash with. So yeah, it was almost unbelievable that someone like her could have stayed in the same kingdom for 3 whole years. Mars knew that if he ever stopped training, Cassandra would finally come back and end him. He felt pure gratitude for the brutal training he'd pushed through, because it forged him into something far stronger. And then, he knew one thing for sure: if he wanted to survive, he still had to get even stronger. The weak little escape route he'd picked to dodge the assassins backfired hard, shoving him straight into a nightmare that felt like the underworld itself. Because at that moment, Mars had no clue that meeting Cassandra would flip his whole life upside down. Still, if he wanted to stay alive, he'd have to dodge Gamera's assassins, bulldoze his way through monsters that could crush him, and, worst of all, survive the one person trying to kill him: his own master. Mars had to keep shoveling monster meat down. There was zero way out. Quick pause: if you're loving this, help us hit 1,000 subscribers. One click and you power up instantly. Subscribe now. Back to the story. Time had barely crawled since Cassandra vanished. Then, right in that stretch, Mars got hit again by yet another assassin. He dropped the attacker. Boom, that made it the 10th assassin he'd wiped out this month. The insane count even had Mars wondering if the assassin business might one day run out of bodies, but still, Gamers didn't slow down for a second, they kept hunting his life like it was business as usual. Gamera shoved Mars' father into a marriage pact with his own daughter, part of a cold scheme to get a son. The kind of kid who'd seize the right to inherit the throne, and so Mars got yanked out of the line of succession, because that red demon Cassandra somehow ended up becoming his mentor, and the way she trained him felt less like coaching and more like she was trying to execute him piece by piece. Mars still remembered her chilling warning, keep stuffing yourself with monster meat, and if she caught him slacking the next time they met, she'd kill him. So yeah, Mars had to get stronger no matter what if he wanted to stay alive, and sometimes he couldn't help wondering how his life spiraled into this mess. Nearby, Mars spotted a bunch of men sparring, one fighter going up against four at once, and it hit him hard. Over 200 years had passed since the last war, so the real combat training had basically slipped into the past. The Kingdom of Fallen was living through its most peaceful age, where sword skill was often seen as pointless, even dismissed as barbarian stuff. Even sword duels were banned, so anyone who kept training with blades the serious way often got labeled as weird or unstable, and in some cases they even treated it like a crime punishable by prison. Mars strode up to the men and asked straight up if he could tag along with them. One guy demanded to know who he was, and the next guy sized him up and decided he must be some noble's kid. Then one warned Mars to get out before he got killed, while the other grumbled that Mars was probably just toying with them, mocking them for laughs, and right then Mars clocked it. These men hated nobles. Among them, one guy totally got what was going on, and he let Mars train alongside the rest. The man warned him, don't cry about it if you end up dying. Then, Agma's name on his tongue, he tore off toward Mars. In the next instant, Mars tossed Agma aside with a brutal single strike, then sneered, saying Agma was still breathing, like he just expected her to be cut clean in half. The very next second, every one of the men lunged at Mars together. Moments later, the men dropped to their knees in a row, and Mars told them straight up, this is it. From now on, they'd be his training partners every 7 days. He also made it clear that he was stronger than all 5 of them put together. Then one of the men snapped, refusing to believe it, yelling that Mars just wanted to tag along for laughs. And he raged that they already barely managed to grab enough food each day, which, a noble like Mars couldn't possibly get it. He'd been living on decent meals every single day, so the man snapped, demanding to know what Mars was actually planning to eat that night. Mars said, red-boned meat, and the man just stared, completely baffled. But Mr. Agma snapped, red-bone meat is monster flesh, and he warned that a red bone was no foe someone like Mars could smash alone. Another man snapped that Mars was the one lying, then someone else chimed in like it was common knowledge that monster meat would poison you. Mars just stared them down, treating the whole lying accusation like pure ignorance. Then he snapped his finger and yelled that something was creeping up on them from behind. A colossal blood bear burst into view, and the men instantly panicked, screaming out of pure fear, while Mars stared it down, wondering in a low, quiet thought if it could be dinner tomorrow. In the next blink, he sliced the monster's head clean off. Then Mr. Agma froze, staring at what he just witnessed. Mars then revealed the truth. He wasn't just staring, he was actually devouring the meat, and he practically dared Mr. Agma to take a bite too. Mr. Agma reached for a tiny piece, and Mars practically screamed, "One bite too much and you'll be dead." So Mr. Agma slowly took exactly that small bite. That bite nearly shoved him over the edge. He wasn't used to eating monster meat, and the taste made his stomach revolt. Mr. Agma was born the 3rd son of a noble family that worshipped manners and ignored real talent with a sword, and that expectation choked him. In his head, swords weren't for showing off, they were for building power. Some people sneered at him as a stain on the nobility, while others just shrugged and called him a fool wasting his shot. To dodge the crushing frustration, he buried his real identity and recruited a crew, then forged them into one fierce group. He named it Group 100, and it was built from the ground up for one mission: chase strength, no excuses. In the crew called 100, power was everything, strength decided your rank, and only the toughest soul earned the title 1. Back then, they already had over 20 members, bragging like crazy that they were the mightiest group in the whole country, claiming they were way stronger than the kingdom's knights, people they treated like nothing but fancy decorations. But right then, someone who wanted far more power showed up right in front of them. Mars pushed Mr. Agma to keep chowing down on that monster meat. After Mr. Agma finished, Mars leaned in and snapped that blood bear meat was still way too rough for him, so he'd have to start with weaker monster bites first, like killer rabbit meat. Then he'd gradually toughen up, and Mr. Agma just sat there reeling because in the end, every word they'd bragged about themselves sounded like a straight-up lie. They swore they had power and grit, called themselves seekers of strength, but now that confidence felt empty as air. Realizing it, he bowed to Mars and declared, "You're worthy 0, the one above the strongest." Then he turned to the group and made it clear they'd accept Mars's guidance and begged him to join them and train them. Mars blurted out that strange title again and again, totally lost because 0 made no sense to him. Still, Agma gave him the title and told him his place in the group should be 0's. Mars stuck out like a sore thumb, so this new name fit the moment perfectly. Mars also hid his real face under armor he dug up from ancient rooms, then jumped straight into training with the crew, and that's when everything clicked, letting him finally unleash his full power and handle fights against multiple opponents like a monster. No matter how many times Mars wiped out the members of 100, they kept surging back to their feet and trading blows with him until their bodies finally gave out from sheer exhaustion. So much grit even the assassins sent to finish him never managed. Even though everything felt a little off, Mars couldn't help feeling proud of their grit, and with that determination powering them, a whole year flew by as they kept training side by side, until the results hit hard and blew them away. The whole way things were heading felt strange as hell. By then, every single member of the crew had joined in and started chewing down on monster meat too. The fighters who could chew through the meat of bigger, deadlier monsters earned the highest praise, but if you could only stomach weaker monster meat, people immediately tagged you as a weakling. Even so, Mars refused to believe that a person's worth or greatness could be judged by just one single number. As a prince, he'd never been celebrated like this before, and it left his heart tangled up in excitement and unease. Meanwhile, at the Black Knights of Fallon HQ, Commander Chrome stood up like something was on fire and asked, "Is it true?" He'd heard rumors about a crew that never stopped battling and somehow kept munching on monster meat, and when one of the knights confirmed it was all real, the whole room went tense. They dubbed themselves 100, and reports said even some Black Knights had slipped in with them. This hit Commander Chrome like a punch to the gut. But among regular folks, plenty swore the group was doing good. With the knights too busy fighting the biggest threats, people figured hunting monsters on the side was exactly the kind of help they needed. Commander Chrome stayed on high alert, because once you start munching monster meat and even gulping its blood, you don't just eat. You raise terrifying cult-level alarms in your head, especially when it might be his own subordinates wrapped up in it, and that thought hit too hard to ignore. So he decided to investigate the group called 100 himself, and if they were truly trying to unleash chaos across the country, he was going to have the Black Knights shut them down face to face. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, 100 member is getting ready to teach a brand new recruit how to hunt monsters, and he makes sure the newcomer doesn't overdo it. The Mohawk man told the newcomers to munch monster meat slow and steady in tiny bites, and as Commander Chrome kept a hidden eye on everything, he realized this whole thing looked nothing like he'd imagined. He couldn't even spot who's who in the group, and it hit him hard. Why in the world would their organization let just about anyone walk in? The Mohawk man sprinted up to Chrome and sized up his sword skills on the spot, saying that with ability like that, Chrome could jump straight into the ranking battles right away, no waiting. Then he made it crystal clear, the group's top rule was eating monster meat, and if you couldn't stomach it, even the strongest fighter would be branded as lacking determination. That Mohawk guy shoved a hunk of monster meat into Chrome's hands and practically dared him to bite, saying it might taste awful at first, but once his body got used to it, he'd grow stronger for real. Chrome still couldn't shake the question of whether this was truly necessary, yet the moment he forced himself to take a bite, he realized it didn't matter anymore, because he'd already come this far. That taste nearly made him heave, and the Mohawk man erupted into laughter, saying he'd reacted the exact same way the first time he tried it. Right then, Chrome's mind spun. What if this guy clocked his real identity and was trying to poison him? In Chrome's mind, it was crystal clear any crew brave enough to chew on stuff like that had to be an evil cult, no question. So he swore he'd just bide his time, stockpile real proof, and once he had it, he'd step in personally and take every one of them down. A whole year slammed by and Chrome's body blew up, thicker muscle, tougher frame, and a spark of power he couldn't ignore. Monster meat wasn't just food anymore, it was a cheat code. Day by day, he felt faster, sharper, and wildly stronger, like his strength had hit an all-new gear. For a full 100 nights, the crew hunted monsters and brought back meat, every last bite gone. Then the gloves came off, they started brutal duels until one of them dropped to the ground. Chrome still remembered the day he doubted his own mind back in the early days, but chasing strength had grown so intense that somehow it started to feel downright satisfying. Chrome's mind kept snapping back to the man called Zeros, the one who stood on top of 100, someone who felt impossible to reach, like he belonged to a different world. Zeros wielded legendary techniques like the sonic blade and the magic barrier, skills people swore were used by the hero who founded the country, and on top of that, he handed those powers out to others without hesitation. Chrome realized Zeros never kept his guidance to himself for a second when someone truly wanted to get stronger, and that lit a question in Chrome's head: how could a fighter like that carry such a noble heart? So now, the idea of subjugating 100 didn't just feel wrong, it felt like blasphemy. In that moment, Chrome finally felt it, like he'd uncovered the real reason to keep living. Back at the castle, Mars strode through the halls, ears tuned to the wild rumors flying about 100. Some people were calling them nothing but monster-hunting barbarians, while the common folk swore they were heroes, quietly cutting down the creeps that made life miserable. Nobles and regular citizens couldn't agree on a thing, and after living with the constant threat that came with being a prince, Mars had to admit it. Being one of the Zeros in 100 felt way more fun. Inside the throne room, Mars got hit with a direct question. Did he know about a group called the 100? Lately, rumors had been flying about a vicious crew that brawled with each other and even chomped down on monster meat, and some folks were calling it a total mad cult. Mars didn't buy it, the whole story sounded off to him, and he demanded to know where anyone even got that information. The voice coming at him belonged to Gamera, the same man who'd been gunning for Mars's life for ages. Then he declared, "Mars will be king one day," before snapping, "but your time as a prince has been a disaster." That's when Gamera threw out his plan. He pushed Mars to crush the notorious 100. And if he won, everyone inside the kingdom and out would finally see him as the true heir to the throne. Gamera also swore Mars's swordsmanship was top tier. Gamers had a point. Nobody fit the job like Mars to crush those so-called bandits, and the moment the idea hit him, Mars instantly understood what it was really asking of him. 100 was winning the crowd, and if Mars was the one who crushed them, that support would splinter overnight. To Mars, it screamed one thing: Gamers was playing revenge. Even Mars' own father kept marching to Gamers' orders. Then Gamers turned to Mars and demanded, "Can you pull it off?" Mars calmly said, "Got it," and agreed to take on the request. After he stormed out of the throne room and cut through the hallway, Mars' mind started racing. Gamers was clearly trying to shove him into a filthy role and wreck his status. Mars saw the trap coming and he refused to let Gamers play him. But one question kept clawing at him. How in the world was he going to fix this? Right nearby, a girl sat on a chair, perfectly still, and Mars instantly clocked that she was there. She said it had been ages since she'd last laid eyes on him. Mars snapped into suspicion the second she realized who she was, and how on earth she'd slipped into the royal hall without a single word of permission. The way she stood made it look like she'd been biding her time to spring an ambush. For a beat, he even wondered if she wasn't just some intruder, but another assassin coming to strike. But her aura hit like a royal blade, nothing like some run-of-the-mill assassin. Then she stepped forward and offered him her power, asking straight up if he wanted to borrow it, considering where he was standing right now. At that exact moment, she called him out by the name Zeros. Mars's whole body locked up with shock, stunned beyond belief. How on earth could she possibly know his true identity? Still scratching her head, Mars wondered how she could possibly know him. Then the girl stayed calm and admitted she'd been counting on him to forget, and reminded him she was Frau, his fiancée. Then, right at that moment, Mars suddenly reeled. He finally had to face it. Yeah, he really did have a fiancée. He cringed with regret for not piecing it together sooner, then latched onto her odd words, Zeros, wondering what she really meant. Yeah, it was real. Mars ran the 100 as the Zeros, but he'd been hiding the biggest secret of all. He was actually a prince. And it had been years since he'd last seen Frau, so from his side, she shouldn't have had a clue about what went down in all that time. Frau stood there with total. Turns out, right from the start, she'd been staring at him the whole time, hiding in the crest like she'd never stopped watching. With that mark in place, she could finally see what he saw and teleport straight to him the moment she wanted. Mars froze, staring at the mark on his wrist like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Now that he thought back, he remembered it. When they were kids, Frau had once thrown a weird spell on him, and back then it had only looked like a normal birthmark. It looked harmless, almost fascinating, so he ignored it completely until he finally clocked the truth. That mark had been a window for her to watch him for years, and that hit him like a punch. She was way more dangerous than he ever imagined. Frau first crossed paths with Prince Mars when she was just 8 years old. Her father didn't just make introductions, he basically crowned them future fiancés right on the spot. Even with all that royal prince status and fancy clothes on, Mars just looked like any other ordinary kid. So back then, Frau didn't give him a second thought. Right then, she just cracked a brand new spell called the Pact Mark, and with nothing to test it on, she picked Mars without even thinking. Boom, the spell worked, and Frau's satisfaction hit full blast. Later, when Mars turned 11, poison hit him hard, and he came within seconds of dying. Frau was so captivated by the poison that she finally used the Pact Mark again after months of ignoring it. And right after that, Prince Mars started acting totally off, even deciding to start eating monster meat. That wild twist instantly made everything way more exciting for her, so she started using the Pact Mark more and more, sneaking glances at him every chance she got, until she realized his magic was rising steadily, right in front of her eyes. That discovery lit a fire in her, and she copied his lead, started chewing monster meat herself right then. But Frau had never once gotten bored watching Prince Mars, and that was exactly when Mars finally realized something was seriously wrong. Frau had been keeping tabs on his private life this whole time, so for now, he shoved the panic aside. Instead, he pushed hard to get Frau to explain what she meant earlier about lending him her power, but she just waved it off. She said they could talk about it later, while everything kept building at the base of 100. Chrome and Warren were both there, and honestly, it's wild to think the two leaders of the 4 Knight Orders, the Red Knights and the Black Knights, had truly just joined in, because in the Kingdom of Falun there were only 4 Knight Orders. The White Knights guarded the king and the mightiest nobles, while the Blue Knights kept the royal capital locked down tight. And when war erupted, the Red and Black Knights pushed out on expeditions and crushed monsters in their path. Even with those powerful figures looming, Zeros felt the air inside 100 turn painfully heavy, so Agma stepped up and told him, "Listen close." With the intel he dug up in hand, Zeros learned the country was gearing up to wipe out 100, and the teams would be led by Chrome from the Black Knights and Warren from the Red Knights. Then Zeros watched the news spread at lightning speed, figured 100 had to get out of the country fast, and when he heard Warren speak, everything went tense. He gathered everyone and laid it all out. Him, Chrome, the Red Knight Order, and the Black Knight Order were locked in to back 100 all the way to the final breath. No matter what Zeros decides, they'll march with it to the very end. Zeros kept scratching his head, trying to get what Warren was really saying about backing them all the way, until Chrome finally broke it down. He didn't think justice survived in that corrupted country anymore. Then Chrome laid it out. If the Red Knights and Black Knights teamed up with 100, their power would hit like a tidal wave. And as long as Zeros stayed in the lead, Chrome swore they actually had a real shot at winning that rebellion. Zeros instantly realized they weren't planning to run at all. They were plotting to betray their own country and ignite a civil war. Honestly, Zeros wanted nothing to do with a rebellion that could get him killed. He'd rather vanish from the country and start fresh somewhere he could live in peace. The Zeros figured that once they caught sight of his real identity, everything would click about where he stood, so he tore off his disguise, bared his true face, and the whole room went silent in shock. The guy they'd been trailing as Zeros, the one who de-risen to lead 100, turned out to be Prince Mars himself, and when he flashed that tiny smile, it was like he already knew everyone would finally get it. After all, as Prince of Falun, there was no way he'd ever raise a rebellion against his own country. Chrome shot to a conclusion about what Zeros meant. Sure, he'd cracked exactly what Mars was trying to tell him, so when he said it, it landed. In Chrome. To Rome's view, Prince Mars never wanted a rebellion. He was aiming for a legitimate war, and in his mind, that meant this fight wasn't a rebellion at all. Chrome blurted with pure fire that this was going to be the kind of battle that proved Prince Mars was the throne's real heir, because in his mind, justice was already on their side. Meanwhile, Mars just stood there in silence, wrestling with the thought that no matter who he was, starting a rebellion against his own country didn't sit right with him. Then one of the others suddenly yelled, awestruck. Certain Mars had been readying for this moment for years. To that person, all of Mars's gathered power, every bit of it, had been built to smash right into this second. And Mars could only think. He'd never raised an army for something like rebellion. Back then, he'd only recruited a handful of people. But now that 100 group had exploded to over 1,000 members. He realized the only way forward was to calm everyone down first and get them to finally grasp what was really going on, and Mars laid it out cold. No matter how big their army was, the royal castle itself was almost impossible to break, so he couldn't shake the fear that they actually believed they had a shot at beating the kingdom. Right then, pounding footsteps crashed the tension and the newcomer blurted out the truth. Royal power wasn't just split between the White Knights and the Blue Knights. There was a magic division too, and when it came to the magic division, Frau declared they'd back Prince Mars right to the end. Mars blinked at her sudden arrival, thrown off guard, but Chrome just chuckled and told him there was no reason to put their resolve to the test, because Ms. Frau had already filled them in on everything beforehand. Some people in 100 might not realize it yet, but she would. Everyone knew her as Frau, the Empress of Thunder, and she ran the kingdom's magic core, the kind of force they banked on for the nation's defense. With total calm, Frau declared she'd take charge of the magic division, and the men exploded with excitement, convinced the win was basically locked in. Mars felt completely lost, because Frau had promised she'd lend him her strength, yet he never imagined it would slam them into a full-blown battle instead of a clean escape, and now it looked like they'd been plotting war from the start, with the whole story barreling straight toward a rebellion against his own country. Mars couldn't shake the question, why was Frau going so hard for them? Sure, their engagement was their parents' doing, but was it really worth betting everything on something this dangerous just for that? Frau told him straight up that until now her actions hadn't matched what someone in her spot as his fiancé should have done. So from this moment on, she vowed to behave like a proper fiancé, and the wild part. That's how she pushed her magic all the way to the power that earned her the title Empress of Thunder, because she'd followed Mars' lead and started eating monster meat. At first, Mars barely interested her, but now she couldn't imagine breaking their engagement, because the closer someone's life hung to death, the more thrilling she found them. Frau told him she wanted to keep watching over him, and she couldn't stop smiling now that he was officially her fiancé. Right then, one of the guys burst out in pure excitement, already certain they'd won, because they'd got the Black Knight's commander, Chrome, the Red Knight's commanders, Warren and Frau, and even the Empress of Thunder in their grasp. Marching beside them came Agma and the whole force of 100, all commanded by Zeros, though everyone missed the truth. Zeros was really Prince Mars. Side by side, they swore they were finally ready to tear out every corrupt noble from the country. Mars felt utterly powerless, like he couldn't stop the storm of momentum gathering around him, because in his gut, this wasn't just a crowd anymore, it was a force that couldn't be scattered. Everyone looked ready to ignite a rebellion against the kingdom, and victory felt dangerously close. Still, Mars couldn't shake one terrifying thought: where was all of this really headed? It felt like the road led straight to his own fight, and then another question hit hard: when exactly had he ever started wanting the throne? Chrome threw his arms up and declared they were ready to die for him, because in their eyes, Prince Mars was the true heir to the kingdom of Fallon. Around them, the others roared in the name of justice, guns blazing with one goal: make their rebellion succeed. Mars stared at the memory of the day he was first ordered to wipe out 100. Back then he only had two paths: run or rebel. But now, there was no road back. He never meant to spark a rebellion or chase the throne. He just wanted to live, that was it. For years he'd fought the world solo, no allies in sight, just him against everything. Until suddenly people stepped in, standing at his side, and their trust hit him so hard he couldn't find it in himself to push them away. Frau watched him like her life depended on it. She knew Mars had turned into a real threat to the kingdom, but some pull she couldn't name kept her eyes locked on him anyway. She swore with fierce resolve that the rebellion would win, and that she'd stand shoulder to shoulder with him until the fight was over. At last, the day finally hit when 100 would go up against the kingdom. A knight stationed behind Mars clocked the tension in his stance and muttered that he looked on edge. Maybe Mars was nervous, since this was his very first time stepping into a situation like this. The knight leaned in and told him, "Leave the fighting to the Black Knights and the Red Knights. Mars' noble duty is simple: smash the Zeros, the leader of 100. If he didn't follow through, the fallout would be brutal." The White Knights were packed with the sons and daughters of powerful nobles, tightly linked to Gamorous, and instead of shielding Mars, they'd almost certainly sell him out. So they shoved him into a head-on showdown with Zeros, praying he'd crumble in front of them. Soon, Chrome and Warren closed in and fired off a question: "Prince Mars, are we ready to move up?" Chrome demanded a quick slice of Mars's time before the battle even kicked off. The commander of the White Knights snapped in right away and ordered them to wait. because in his eyes you don't address the prince like that, and the prince definitely shouldn't be personally getting involved with a crew of 100. Right then, the commander of the White Knights completely got blindsided. The Black Knights and the Red Knights rolled in like a storm, showing up in full force. To him, the 100 were just regular folks cosplaying as knights, and letting them stand as equals felt like pure disgrace, like the honor of his order had been dragged through the mud. Meanwhile, Mars clocked the hunger in Chrome and Warren, and when he saw their grit, he knew he had to dig deeper and harden his own resolve. Mars fired up every soldier gathered before him, shouting that their real enemies were hiding inside the capital, while the White Knight commander went speechless, scrambling to figure out what Mars was really saying. In his eyes, the enemy was meant to be level 100. Then, before anyone could even react, Mars snapped into action and swung his sword, crashing it straight into the man's head in one brutal motion. The members of 100 stared in shock, stunned by what they'd just witnessed. The strike snapped in with razor-precise accuracy, a clean, flawless cut landing like pure master-level perfection. Afterward, Mars snapped his focus to yet another White Knight and warned him, no matter how that fight played out, the White Knights were always planning to kill him. When Mars finally got the truth, the knight seemed to jerk in shock, but to Mars it had been painfully obvious the whole time. Then Chrome stepped up and chopped the man's head off too, saying the result didn't surprise him anymore. Another White Knight blurted, begging for his life, swearing he never meant to assassinate Mars, claiming it wasn't his call at all, and that he'd just been obeying the deputy commander's orders. Chrome stared down at him with total disgust, because in his eyes, a knight who cowered like that couldn't possibly guard the kingdom. As long as monsters like that kept breathing, real peace would never come. So Chrome didn't hesitate, he swung the blade and chopped his head clean off. Soon after that, the last White Knights were wiped out too. Chrome snapped that they'd stained their honor beyond repair. Then he shoved Mars forward, screaming that it was time to unleash real justice on a corrupted kingdom. Mars fell silent for a moment, sensing how real Chrome's loyalty was, though the intensity in his gaze hit like a tidal wave. Warren warned them they were probably being watched, and Mars already knew it, so from that moment on, it all came down to speed. Mars shoved everyone to sprint toward the royal capital, and when they hit the city gate, a White Knight shouted that the prince was here and slammed the gates shut. Just as the order was about to be carried out, Sir Bled of the Blue Knights slammed the White Knight to the ground, barked for the gates to open, and the Blue Knights swore loyalty to Prince Mars, who immediately recognized Sir Bled and praised his work as Sir Bled explained they kept order in the capital, so they'd chosen to stand by their prince. The moment Hundred stepped into the capital, the White Knights were already trading blows with them, and mid-battle one of those knights clocked Agma, snarling like he was about to prove what real swordsmanship looked like. Agma shot back with pure contempt, scoffing that calling it real swordsmanship was a joke, and then he vowed that Hundred would show them what true swordsmanship actually meant. As Agma slammed down the White Knights in front of him, he made one thing crystal clear: this battlefield wasn't for showboating, it was for whoever could live. Agma stared into the truth of what strength really means, because to him, real power was the kind that smashes the enemy into nothing, and ideals or pretty speeches sure as hell wouldn't keep you alive on the battlefield. Violence wouldn't just quit because someone threw brute force at it. One of the White Knights finally admitted the words hit the mark, at least to him, because in his eyes those 100 were just thugs, plain and simple. Mars stayed quiet, but his heart agreed bitterly. Then the White Knights snapped that they still had the mage corps in their corner, and once those mages stepped onto the battlefield, this fight would explode into something way more terrifying. Inside the mage tower, Frau's father ripped her away from the quiet and told her terrible news had arrived. Mars had kicked off a rebellion, and Frau immediately turned to her father with a bold request. She demanded he step aside and hand the family title to her, yet her father froze in pure confusion. He tried to get a straight answer about whether she really meant for him to quit his title, because he shot back that he wasn't old enough to retire and the head of the family wasn't a role a woman could just take. Frau started weaving a spell, and her father immediately snapped, asking what in the world she was planning to do. At that exact moment, Frau snapped off a brutal lightning spell that slammed into the other mages in the room, and as she kept talking, she laid out the whole assault. First comes the shuck, then the lucky ones get hit with lightning, and if they somehow endure that, they're finished off by an explosion. Anyone who made it through the explosion would still be ripped apart next, like their very existence was about to evaporate. The mages rushed in, begging her to stop, so Frau spun back to her father and pushed her plea again, demanding he hand the family title over to her. She begged him just this once to say yes to his daughter's plea. Out on the battlefield, one of the 100 snapped with questions in his mind. Why hadn't the mage corps shown up yet, and was Frau behind whatever was going wrong? Right after that, the gamers showed up and he shouted at Prince Mars, jaw dropped at the twist, because he never once pictured Mars ending up as the face of a rebellion. Then the gamers snapped, declaring that Mars's march to the throne would stop right there, right then. And speaking for himself, he swore that Mars's life was already forfeit. Right after that, a squad of fighters surged forward, slammed themselves in front of Mars, and got ready to go to war. The adventurers charged ahead and swore right there that they'd come to rip Mars's life from him. Mars' father barked his name, and as Mars stared back, one cold thought hit him. His father had never once tried to unravel his mother's death, like he only cared that he stayed safe. Then bam, some mage slammed a gravity spell onto Mars. Even with the spell hanging over him, Mars stayed unnervingly calm, while Gamera confidently shot back that Mars wouldn't be moving again because magic had already bound him tight. Gamma admits that the sudden rebellion blindsided him, but he'd already planned for it. That's why he hired a squad of top-rank adventurers. Soon, reinforcements will flood in, surround Mars on every side, and wipe it all out for good. Mars still had the gravity bracelet Cassandra gave him, and with the spell's weight pushing down, he just kept striding forward. While one adventurer gaped in disbelief, convinced Mars couldn't have escaped, and watching like the gravity spell wasn't even working, Mars calmly told them it was working exactly right. He'd gotten used to that kind of pressure, until something erupted right above their heads. One of the adventurers immediately clocked the attack as a poison lizard's move, then snapped a warning. Mars was about to get paralyzed fast. Mars suddenly snapped, "I know that creature," and said its meat tasted awful right on the spot. The adventurer froze, staring in disbelief, and demanded to know if Mars really had chewed poison lizard meat, the kind that's basically pure poison. Another adventurer charged at Mars, sure the whole thing was a bluff, but Mars answered with one ruthless strike. Their A-rank party froze in pure terror as their companion got sliced clean in two right in front of them. One of them blurted to the healer, begging to know if the fallen man could still be saved. Then the healer stayed cool and said only a necromancer could touch something like that. Mars swallowed his pride, apologized, and admitted it had been ages since he fought without the bracelet, the thing that usually keeps his strength from slipping out of control. The moment the group spotted him, several threw daggers straight at his chest. Then one guy barked, "Mika, cast your attack spell. Luda, back them up. Chad, keep Mars busy." But Mars didn't flinch at all. When another adventurer came charging in, he swung a sonic blade and shut him down. The shockwave hit like a truck, and the attacker got sliced clean in half. Another adventurer screamed for the healer to help, but the healer snapped back that fixing injuries like that would take a saint's power. Then rage rippled through the rest, and one of them surged with energy, blasting blazing crimson flames straight at Mars. He swore the fire would crash down on their enemy and torch them to nothing. Even then, Mars stayed stone calm. He knew he couldn't brute force his way through that assault, and just as the flames were about to hit, a magic barrier snapped into place and swallowed the attack. The rest of the party froze in pure shock. The mage who launched those flames dropped to her knees, stunned beyond belief. Her deadliest spell had been snuffed out by a magic barrier, the kind of power you only ever see in high-level monsters. Mars smirked a little, taking in the stunned faces around him, and weirdly, it felt amazing. He'd built that talent from endless run-ins with demon apes, grinding it into perfection by devouring their meat over and over. With calm in his eyes, he strode forward and told the rest to step aside. Pride flared in him as he insisted he wouldn't kill them, but then the party leader shoved forward and cut him off. Mars leaned in and told him to run straight up, promising, "If you flee now, I'll let you go." That only sparked rage. The leader thought Mars was laughing at them. With pride roaring in his chest, he snapped that they'd never just walk away after their comrades were slaughtered, and reminded Mars he was an A-rank adventurer. Then he swung his sword straight at Mars. And Mars instantly slammed his defense into place. Their blades rang against each other again and again, and in that blur of steel, Mars clocked it. This party leader wasn't just swinging around, he was sharp. For one breath, it looked like the guy might actually match him. Then Mars snapped in a brutal kick. The brutal hits blasted the party leader straight into the wall. The man froze in disbelief, his brain refusing to accept that a mere kick had taken him down. Then the thought hit him. Mars, is he more monk than swordsman? Mars, meanwhile, knew exactly why his master had always battled like that, and it had carved the same style into him. So with the defeat sinking in, Mars snapped his focus straight to Gamorus. He pointed out that Gamorus was the last one standing, and for the first time, fear flashed all over Gamera's face. In the quiet of his thoughts, doubt started clawing at him. How did everything end up like this? He poured his whole life into the kingdom, convinced every sacrifice he made was for its people. 15 years ago, the kingdom was in total chaos, and the former queen lit the fuse. Back then, Gamras pushed the king to stage a coup, all to save the kingdom from collapsing. Ever since then, he'd thrown himself into the nobles' world day by day. He boosted the country's strength while keeping a close eye on every noble move. To him, ruling meant embracing both the kingdom's shining virtues and its filthy corruption just to hold the balance steady. And still, through every single plan, Prince Mars kept showing up as the one unstoppable obstacle. Soon enough, the gamers started to suspect the nobles would try to turn Mars into a political puppet, so to stop it before it started. He'd already decided Mars had to be erased, no matter that Mars himself was innocent. Gamera had set deadly poisons, brutal traps, and assassins to wipe him out, but Mars somehow kept surviving every single ambush. No allies, no protection, just pure grit refusing to die. Right then, Agma's voice blasted from nearby. He declared the nobles were done, saying they'd already crushed them all. He also pointed out that Gamras was the only one left, and Mars nearly choked when he heard every noble was already wiped out. Then a terrifying thought hit him. What if 100 really had killed them all? Then the kingdom's fate hung in the air. Who would actually rule it still had no answer. Meanwhile, Gamera couldn't shake the gut feeling. Was Prince Mars secretly the very same person as Zero's? That thought shook him to his core, like Mars had been secretly cooking up his own faction the whole time, waiting for today to finally explode. Mars quietly couldn't shake the fear that 100 might never truly know how to run a kingdom, and in the end, he started believing it was smarter to step aside and let his father take the throne. Mars snapped his focus to his father and pressed him on the throne. Then panic flashed across his face, and he instantly declared it was Mars's to claim. Mars then demanded to know if anyone in the room truly understood how to run a kingdom. Hearing that question blew the gamers' minds clean off their shoulders. Mars yanked Gamera into the spotlight, called his name, and handed him the kingdom's steering wheel, running the whole realm's affairs. Gamers were totally blindsided by the decision. In the days after all that chaos, the kingdom snapped back into order faster than anyone dared hope, and right after that, a wedding ceremony lit up the scene. Mars's bride was, of course, Frau. Through sheer courage in the Civil War, Frau won the trust of countless people. But before long, she shocked everyone by revealing a brand new obsession. Her next move was to try a summoning ritual that demanded human sacrifices, and when she heard that, Mars couldn't help but quietly wonder if becoming queen was truly something she was willing to accept. Meanwhile, Agma and the rest of 100 grilled Mars for ages over his call to hand the reins to Gameras. Agma's fury spilling out as he blasted the truth that Gameras had already tried to assassinate Mars and sparked the whole disaster, while Chrome pressed Mars harder, demanding to know if he really planned to leave Gameras running the kingdom. Mars then hammered home a sharp question. If the gamers weren't running the show, who on earth would steer the kingdom's politics? The members of the 100 were obsessed with one idea, that only the strongest deserved power, and that belief meant not a single one of them had what it took to rule. After that choice, Gamera hasn't stopped for a second. He's been grinding ever since. At one point, he swore his loyalty to Mars and crowned him as the king above every other king, then pledged, "I'll serve you with my life and carry out my duties without fail." After some time passed, Chrome stood up and officially declared the coronation, then crowned Mars as King Mars. People showered King Mars with praise, begging for a reign that would crush war and bring prosperity to the kingdom, while the 100 vowed to march behind him 0 by 0 wherever he led. But deep down, Mars never wanted anything grand, he only wanted to survive. But somehow, that one bite of monster meat carried him straight to the throne, And now, as King Mars, the only question left was how he'd kick off rebuilding his kingdom. But nobody had a clue what was about to hit him next. Sometime later, Agma stormed up to Luda, the cleric healer, holding a freshly sliced-off arm and begging her to save it. Luda froze at first sight, then once some time slipped by, she managed to snap the arms back on for real, lock by lock. Agma's face lit up with pure satisfaction. He praised her without holding back, calling her their dependable older sister and proving she's a legit A-rank cleric with insane skill. Right then and there, the arena's ranking match was underway. Agma, sitting at number 1, locked in against Bruno, ranked 5th, and both of them from Team 100 were duking it out in the official ranked arena showdown. In the middle of the brawl, Agma, way stronger than Bruno, slashed through his right arm with one brutal strike, and the fight instantly turned into pure, brutal chaos. From the sidelines, Mars stared at it all and felt his stomach churn. This whole spectacle was brutal, no mistaking it, and he couldn't believe it had come to this. After he finally climbed onto the throne, Gamera went all in on his duties with this eerie, relentless focus. By sweeping up the nobles' wealth and assets, the kingdom's finances shot up overnight. And still, Mars hadn't paid the 100 back for the support they'd risked during the rebellion. Then it hit him, bam, a wild idea, and he decided, we build an arena. These old training grounds were a total mess, no real arena there, and handing Mars a prize that sent the reward to 100 people would have lit a fire under everyone's excitement. When Mars floated the plan, Gamera snapped back, asking if they were turning this into a public spectacle. Mars grinned and said yeah, that was exactly the vibe. Gamera then shot Mars a question. Was he trying to turn the ranking battles into a real national attraction? Mars wondered if that meant the government would step in and rake in admission fees from spectators. But Gamera jumped in, clearing up that wasn't quite what he meant, and Mars immediately frowned at his answer. Gamma freezes mid-motion, like the truth just hit him. In the next heartbeat, Gamera confidently declared that the real answer was gambling, and Mars just stared, completely baffled by the whole assumption. Gamera wasn't aiming for this at all, but the more he pushed forward, the more the idea lit a fire in him, betting on the ranking matches of 100, turning the arena into a nationwide money machine and carving out a brand new revenue stream for the kingdom. Fallon was struggling, and it had no real powerhouse industry. To Gamera, the whole scheme was genius. He started to think Mars had seen this whole outcome coming from the very start, right when he kicked off the mission with 100. Mars just smirked, then let Gamers run with that interpretation. If the plan would help the kingdom, Mars saw zero reason to fight it, because the gamers went wild, swearing the arena was about to become one of the nation's biggest treasures, and he wasted no time, immediately setting everything in motion. In just 6 months, they finished the arena, and it was ready to roar. After the ranking battles brought gambling, the kingdom's revenue skyrocketed and then some more than doubled. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a wild scene blew up. Aaron from the 100 burst in carrying his injured friend, and the truth was brutal. There was a sword jammed straight through his chest. Aaron begged Luda, the rank cleric, for help, and she wasted no time looking him over. Then she spotted it, a sword still jammed in the man's chest. "He's done," Luda said flatly, calling him a corpse, and she snapped back at Aaron, asking why he'd stabbed his own friend if he really cared. Aaron blurted that Luda was the only one who could heal his friend, and there was still a chance to save him, while Luda shot back that it was already hopeless. Aaron crumpled with desperation, sobbing that if Bari couldn't come back to life, he had no idea what he'd do. Right then, Agma burst in and snapped Aaron out of his panic, telling him to calm down. Then he wheeled on Luda and swore everything would be fine as long as she brought Bari back to life. Agma snapped his voice louder and told her straight up, if she refused, nobody could guess who would die next. He pushed harder, making it crystal clear she already knew what it meant, and then he promised her if she brought Bari back, everything would be over. The men crowding them broke down, sobbing and begging Luda to bring Bari back. With everything falling apart, Luda clenched her courage and poured out her prayers with all she had. In what felt like a miracle, Bari snapped back to health. Then the men erupted with relief and awe, praising Luda as an unbelievable healer and calling her a real A-rank cleric. Luda ripped into them, warning them not to pull this stunt on her again, because if it happened a second time, she'd raise the dead into zombies and haul the killers straight to prison. No debate, no mercy. The men snapped to agreement right away. Before long, Mars got yanked into action. He was called to gear up for a special match. In his head, he knew it was either go or get left behind, so he gave the word. He was coming. From that moment on, Mars couldn't slack. he had to keep doing his kingly duties no matter what. In the arena, guys like Agma swept their fights and got prize money on the spot, big rewards, loud cheering crowds, and a reputation everyone wanted to chase. These days, the top 100 rankers are basically celebrities living in wealth, fame, and pure prestige. Every single day, Mars threw down in 10 matches against those rankers, and Agma pumped him up to prove his full power all over again, then demanded he take off the armlets he'd worn during the rebellion. Mars was getting hounded to fight non-stop, so he finally proposed a rule. Whoever topped the ranking match would earn a special showdown with him right after. At the time, Mars thought he'd cracked the perfect plan, one move that would crush every problem fast and shut everyone up, but reality hit hard and the outcome went completely sideways. Warren bragged that he'd already bagged his 5th special match, Aaron shot back that he'd hit 7, Agma crowed that he'd fought 100 without a single miss, and in Mars's head he just snapped. "Stop throwing special matches at me non-stop." Soon after, Agma and Warren sprinted straight toward Mars, shouting that today was the day they finally crushed him for good, Agma refusing to quit no matter how many times they got slammed to the ground, because every hit only fueled the next rise. And watching them, Mars could only think they moved like freaking zombies. They closed in around him, shouting his name at the top of their lungs, chanting for King Mars and Lord Mars like a crowd hungry for a hero. Mars kept staring at the same unfair question: why did it always have to be him on the front lines? He'd been battling those special matches almost every single day while everyone else got a full 5 days to rest. As for Gamorus, Mars couldn't stop wondering if the man had once been a gladiator slave, if that's what his past was hiding. After all, Gamorus swore that every time the king personally hosted special matches, the crowd swelled like crazy, so they had to keep running those events as often as they could. No matter how many challengers Mars smashed, more kept storming back again and again because Cleric Luda was the reason. Mars hired her to heal, but he never saw it coming that her mercy would ignite a non-stop nightmare. Honestly, Mars was fuming, and he wanted to storm up to Gamma and let it all out. But every time Mars saw Gamera push himself past exhaustion, shrinking thinner as he kept the kingdom running, something in him refused to ever criticize him. King Mars's next win got announced, another huge victory, right when everyone thought the pressure couldn't rise anymore. Squashed that day's ranking and finally hit the finish line, yeah, and then Mars couldn't ignore it. Once the Real ordeal was over, the real trouble was about to kick off. Elsewhere, Luda wrung her hands and prayed like her life depended on it, firing purification magic into her own body while cleansing winds blasted at the poison again and again. Yet she couldn't shake the question of why she was made to swallow poison food in the first place, just to keep surviving with detox spells. Meanwhile, in a different dining room, Mars leaned in toward Gamera and demanded to know if the rumors were really true, that those killer rabbits had nearly vanished. Gamera's verified the reports, saying the creatures had nearly vanished from the kingdom's land, so Mars nearly choked on the shock. He never heard of monsters going extinct. In his mind, they were supposed to show up forever unless they didn't disappear at all and someone just chased them out of the region. Gamera leaned in and said the craziest thing. Dragons had started dodging the skies over the kingdom too, and the 100 were tearing each other up just to bag dragons for their meat, while Frau's mage corps jumped into the hunt with magic blazing. When he heard the dragons were finally stampeding out of the territory, Mars couldn't stop his mind from racing. What kind of nightmare had the kingdom turned into? He figured fewer monsters should have been a blessing, but the truth stung. Killer rabbits had once wrecked the crops and terrorized the locals, and the gamers' warning made it clear this wasn't going to be all good news. For folks who weren't used to it, monster meat stronger than killer rabbits was pure poison, and the new 100 recruits couldn't stomach it no matter what, they just crumbled. Mars looked at that mess and thought, easy, if it's poisonous and disgusting then we stop eating it. Mars thought to himself that he'd rather sink his teeth into something way tastier. If people were that hungry for killer rabbit meat, it only makes sense to breed the things themselves. So Gamera pauses, stares at the idea, and wonders if Mars really means raising monsters. That suggestion hit him hard. He tossed aside the usual way of thinking, and the moment he heard what wild idea Gamera was proposing, something about it felt truly remarkable. Meanwhile, Mars instantly clocked the truth. Gamera's was taking the idea dead seriously. And if that kingdom really started breeding monsters for food, every other nation would practically scream that they'd gone insane. Mars snapped that it wasn't about breeding monsters for food at all. Yet Gamera instantly flipped the idea in his head and wondered if this was just meant for show. In the middle of his thoughts, Mars couldn't believe how that logic had spiraled into something so weird. Mars stressed again that it wasn't for entertainment either, and still, Gamera kept thinking, landing on a whole new conclusion. From his point of view, the real goal was crystal clear: breed monsters first, then unleash them as the kingdom's next military weapon. Mars' eyes snapped wide at the idea, and the gamers started buzzing, thinking Mars was about to unveil some huge grand plan. He said straight up that the northern kingdoms already raise dragons and churn out dragon riders. After seeing that, they could boost their own army by raising monsters too. Mars tried to keep up with gamers' logic, but the idea of breeding monsters for war made zero sense to him, so much so that it even sparked the thought that this whole plan felt like something a demon lord would try. Gamera kept on digging into the idea with wild enthusiasm. Could monsters be the next big thing for meat, for spectacle, or for pure military power? It was a brutal concept, sure, but in his eyes it was still worth going after, and Mars rushed to shut that down fast, insisting this was not what he meant. Right as he tried to speak, his voice vanished, nothing came out at all. Stunned, he snapped his head around and stared behind him. Frau stood there, and Mars and Frau were linked through. With that contract seal in place, she could have easily caught every word he said to Gamera before snapping into his side, while Mars watched her work some kind of magic and realized it wasn't a glitch at all. Her power had shut his voice down for good. Mars pressed Frau on whether she really wanted to start breeding monsters, and she just nodded along, quietly intrigued. Mars snapped to the truth and knew the prep had to start right now. Trying to stop her was pointless, because once Frau caught an interest, there was no backing out. Trying to hold her back would just ignite her wrath the second you shut down her obsession, because when that fire hits, she lashes out and everyone pays the price. And now the truly terrifying plan is starting to click: breeding monsters for the military. Back then, Mars had zero idea what was coming, because the non-stop monster hunts by all those people were quietly setting up a catastrophe way bigger than anyone could imagine. In Fallen Kingdom, they kicked off a terrifying plan to mass-produce monsters. For once, it was comforting to see Frau actually pleased with the plan, but Mars couldn't shake the worry that turning monsters into weapons might be overkill. Fallon was tiny and cut off, so why would anyone waste an invasion on it? All he could think about was getting out of this mess, and at certain moments he even wished one of the people from 100 could step in and fight instead. Then, right nearby, Chrome leaned in and called out to King Mars, asking him to check the gravity bracelet he just managed to get. Chrome broke it down. With a bracelet like that, he could edge toward Mars's level of raw power. Mars froze in disbelief, because in his mind that bracelet wasn't protection at all. It was a prisoner's shackle, forged to stop escape and packed with heavy gravity magic. In some countries, criminals got one of these thrown at them for free as a punishment, and the wild part? Those lucky users were supposed to be the elite guards from Mars' own kingdom. Honestly, Mars couldn't even judge because he was barely standing to talk. And not long after that, Frau showed up and handed Mars a gift. It was another bracelet, and she told Mars she'd forged it herself, only to admit that enchanting it with a gravity pull 5 times stronger nearly broke her. The moment 5 times hit, Mars' stomach dropped, because magic at that level didn't just take effort, it demanded real, terrifying skill. Mars tried to argue that the bracelet already on his wrist, his 3 times gravity lifeline, was more than enough, because in his head, 5-fold gravity would wreck daily life for sure. But Frodden stared him down and coldly said the name Cassandra. She told him Mars had been wearing gifts Cassandra, maybe more women, handed to him, and the second she said it, unease hit Mars so hard his whole face changed. Since that contract sigil bound them together, Frau could always keep eyes on him, and when it came to Mars, she could see almost everything. Even Cassandra, his own master, couldn't slip past her notice, and deep down, Frau was the only one who truly knew. The poison ring and Mars's triple gravity bracelet. Yeah, both of them were gifts from his own master, and the truth is those gifts felt downright awful. Mars caught himself thinking that Frau's jealousy could be kind of charming, but the truth hit hard. He did not want her to compete like this. If she was set on giving him something, he'd rather she hand over a gift with magical protection, because a powerful enchanted item that could keep him safe would be perfect. Still, Frau insisted that bolstering her husband was a wife's job, and in Mars's mind he couldn't stop wondering what kind of wife would believe that. Frod locked eyes with him and stared him down in silence, like he was daring him to refuse the gift. and Mars instantly felt uneasy. Reality hit him hard. He couldn't just read her mind, not easily, but he also knew Frau wasn't putting on an act. She truly fought tooth and nail for his sake. When people pushed them to end their engagement, she shut that down instantly, no hesitation. Even back during the earlier rebellion, she had thrown herself into danger and risked her life just to stand beside him. Mars didn't hate Frau, no matter how she could seem like she was missing a few human feelings, because she was still his wife, the one he held close. So he finally took the gift, slipped on the gravity bracelet she'd made, and agreed to wear it. He heaved the weight, and the instant he thanked her, the throne under him groaned, buckled from the impact, and shattered into pieces. Right after that, inside the throne room, a guard rushed up to Mars and snapped that a messenger from the kingdom of Cadnia had arrived, here to deliver a message. Cadnia was the neighboring country too, sitting right beside the demon beast forest. And unlike Fallon, it had a much deeper history and ranked higher as a nation. So while both kingdoms fought to survive the forest horrors, keeping diplomatic ties between them would have been the smartest move. Mars opened the letters the king of Cadnia had sent, hoping this was finally his chance to step up and do what a real king was meant to do. But almost instantly, his face twisted into something uneasy. The letter wasn't just polite complaining, it was a full-blown accusation. Fallon had gone monster hunting too hard, wrecking the region's natural balance, and now monsters were pouring into Cadnia's territory and smashing everything in sight. So the message demanded Fallon own up and hunt those monsters inside Cadnia's lands too. Then the letter demanded 3,000 gold coins in compensation, and after reading every word, Mars went quiet, because he knew things were seriously bad. When their non-stop hunt drove even dragons to dodge their lands, the nearby countries had to feel the shock too, and that hit home hard. They cooked up a real disaster. Mars shoved the letter into Gamarus's hands and told him to read. The moment Gamarus finished, his eyes snapped wide. Cadnia was pointing the finger at Fallon for the flood of monsters spilling into their territory. The accusation left him staring in disbelief. Gamma snapped back hard, insisting every nation should wrestle its own monsters. Then he grilled whether Cadnia had truly lost its national pride. Lord Odd, the messenger, stayed cool and said it wasn't that simple. Until recently, Cadnia had been dealing with monsters inside its own territory with zero trouble. Lately, Fallon has been hunting monsters like crazy and pushing deeper and deeper into the demon beast forest. So now the monsters that managed to escape are flooding straight into Cadnia's lands, turning everything into a full-on crisis they can't rein in. And when Mars hears the truth, it hits him. His own people's reckless choices really did land Cadnia in serious trouble. Warren then snapped into his defense, insisting his country's plan had always been the same: stamp out the monsters and push forward the demon beast forest. So, in his eyes, there was no way another nation had any right to condemn them. Agma shot his voice up in agreement. If more monsters had crawled into Cadnia's territory, then they should crush them and be done with it, no whining. Urin, though, lit up like it was a feast, saying they should just gobble every last one, and to make it worse, he bragged that back home they were running short on monsters already. Mars quietly realized Aaron wasn't the only one, and honestly, he felt a real ache for Cadnia. Meanwhile, Lord Odd weighed the whole mess in his mind and knew their demands were totally out of line. But the king of Cadnia was roaring with fury, and as the diplomat, Lord Odd had no choice but to march those demands straight to Fallon. Truth is, all he craved was to slam this whole thing shut and race back home as fast as he could. King Mars's very presence sent deep, crushing unease crawling over him. When Lord Odd turned his gaze to Mars, the king flashed a smile, and it somehow felt creepy as hell. At first glance, Lord Odd looked like just another noble under Mars's banner. But the whispers about him painted a much darker picture, because people said Mars used to be a rotten prince who nearly got cut loose from everything. When he finally realized the throne was about to slip from his grip, he reportedly snapped into action, took the name Mars, corralled a band of outlaw fighters, and ignited a full rebellion, with rumors saying he slaughtered every noble who stood against him, turning him into a walking nightmare. People even whispered that he tested loyalty by forcing his followers to chew the poisonous flesh of monsters. And after he became king, he went even darker by building an arena where his own men had to battle for him. To Lord Odd, it looks like the whole thing boils down to one clear reason. Gambling, revenue, and entertainment flooded his thoughts and in his mind. King Mars was straight up a madman, and that reputation made Lord Odd believe there was zero chance Mars would ever swallow Cadenia's outrageous demands. Gamers snapped into action on the spot, shouting that the request was a hard no, and insisting the decision was already locked in. Then King Mar rose and declared it. Fallon would fall in line and obey Cadenia's request. That decision blindsided everyone in the room. Mars insisted that his kingdom already had an army of monster hunters waiting in line, raking in huge profits from the arena, so this task wouldn't be a problem at all. On top of that, keeping peace with a neighboring nation was just common sense. Chrome, though, snapped back with sharp worry, begging King Mars to rethink it, because if they folded to this demand, other countries would look at their kingdom like it was weak. Mars finally got what Chrome was saying: push too soft in negotiations and people start treating you like you don't matter, but the truth still burned. Fallon's own choices sparked this mess in the first place. And yeah, Mars had a personal motive too, because in his head, this was the perfect chance to whisk Frau away on a trip outside the kingdom. Mars then slammed the news down. Within the next month, expedition prep would kick off. And during that run-up, he ordered Chrome, the captain of the Black Knights, to back Cadenia as she tore through monsters and crushed them. Chrome snapped to attention and agreed, until the weight of what he'd just signed on for hit him like a truck. Then Mars spun to Lord Odd and demanded whether the plans sounded good. He even asked if Fallon's forces could march into Cadenia while the monsters were being hunted. And Lord Odd shot back right away that it would cause zero trouble, that Cadenia had no objections, and that he was beyond grateful for King Mars' generosity. After some time passed, Chrome charged up to King Mars and demanded the real reason behind his call. No vague answers, just a clear explanation everyone could get. Mars stared at his reflection, realizing he'd pushed it too far. Just blurting out he wanted to visit another country wasn't fit for a king. So he snapped into action and started hunting for a solid excuse. Then Mars snapped his fingers, and a wild idea lit up his mind. He blurted out that a monster stampede might be about to break loose. The crowd around him snapped into surprise. Gamera immediately got it, saying the king was weighing the danger of a stampede. A stampede was when a ridiculous number of monsters suddenly flooded an area, and even if nobody knew why it started, brutal overhunting had a nasty habit of sparking it. Plus, monster activity across Cadenia had been spiking lately. King Mars warned, if anyone pushes the monsters one step too far, they'll spiral into a full stampede, and if that disaster hits, the kingdom of Cadenia will get wrecked for good. Gamers snapped right to the meaning and figured, so that's why they wanted to wipe out those monsters before anything even started. When Mars heard that, he finally exhaled. His explanation had landed. If a stampede ever hit Cadenia, it would slam straight into Fallon too, so this expedition wasn't just a plan, it was national defense in disguise. Mars stood there, silently stunned by how solid his excuse had turned out. Then King Mars leaned in and asked Chrome if he finally got why the decision was made. Chrome nodded hard, saying he understood now, and that he could see just how deep King Mars's wisdom really went. With steel in his eyes, Chrome announced that Chadonia's monster-slaying mission would be handed fully to the Black Knights, and swore they'd pull it off no matter what. Mars had to admit this mission was lighting a fire in their head way too fast, but hey, at least their motivation didn't blink. 1 month later, the expedition finally kicked off, and Mars couldn't shake the thought that this was his very first trip with Frau, so yeah, he was genuinely excited. By now, the monster subjugation should have already been finished, and Cadenia's king was probably getting ready to greet them. But before long, Mars started to wonder. You're gonna wonder why this operation ballooned so fast. He'd thought it would stay small at first. He expected a diplomatic envoy, officials and scholars packed together, but what stared back at him looked like a full-on military campaign. Right then, Agma shoved through and told King Mars, "We've reached Cadenia's capital, Mas." Mars snapped his gaze forward and he froze in pure shock at what he saw. The capital city of Cadenia was. He found himself totally boxed in by monsters, and the site's betrayal hit him like a punch. he just couldn't believe it. He truly thought the Black Knights had already wiped them out half a month ago. Just a month back, Chrome sat there, staring into the distance, realizing with awe how brutally spot-on King Mars's foresight really was. At first, he couldn't wrap his head around why Mars would ever agree to Cadenia's demands, but the more he replayed it in his mind, the pieces snapped into place. Suddenly, Chrome was convinced of one thing. King Mars must have seen Cadenia's foolish request coming from a mile away. Chrome was convinced Mars had deliberately kept pushing the demon beast forest forward just to spark exactly this kind of chaos. From Mars's point of view, he never really feared a monster stampede. He probably wanted it like a weapon. Chrome was sure the whole chaos was cooked up from the start, because if Mars whipped up a monster rush, he'd finally get the opening to seize Cadenia and pull him under control. Believing it with his whole heart, Chrome tore through the forest, and this time a weird black liquid burst and scattered everywhere. In the kingdom of Fallon, they've been racing to crack how to mass-produce monsters, and their newest breakthrough is this liquid. Spread it over an area and it pulls monsters in droves, yanking them toward it like moths to a blazing flame. Chrome was sure that once that liquid soaked into Cadena, monsters would swarm the land in numbers so huge they'd choke the streets. Yet even that wouldn't shake King Mars because he'd planned for it all. Right when the stampede hit its peak, Mars and Lady Frau would burst in and rip those attackers away, saving every town and village. And while they did it, they'd win major influence in Cadena and plant their feet for good. Chrome burst out laughing like he'd just seen genius, convinced King Mars's strategy was flawless. So flawless that he thought this fight would spark Mars's conquest of all of Ares. With that belief locked in, Chrome toasted his king's brilliance. Then right there in the present, Agma said the Black Knights had carried out the plan to perfection, and Mars froze, baffled, because he couldn't even figure out what plan Agma was talking about. Agma looked just as rattled by Mars' outburst, while Mars kept pressing him, demanding he explain what Agma meant and swearing that the only sensible move was to help Cadenia. Mars didn't hesitate, he barked the order right away. Every monster circling the capital had to be wiped out, no exceptions. Mars couldn't shake the question, why were monsters ravaging the royal capital of Moss when Chrome and his crew were already meant to have handled it? No matter the answer, there was only one move left: wipe out every single monster. Even so, Mars realized there were still way too many, and he couldn't risk being late for his meeting with the king of Cadenia. Right beside him, Frau started chanting. Her spell dragged darkness past Crimson and smashed everything back into the void. Black flames tore out of the underworld's depths and blasted outward. Mars stared at the spell and realized its power was absolutely unreal. He barked orders to the Black Knights to handle the monsters, but the moment he saw how bad it had gotten, how even the capital was under attack, his stomach sank. Then a man slid up to him and poured out his gratitude. The stranger introduced himself as George, the captain of the knights tasked with protecting Moss. Mars felt like fate had handed him a lifeline and immediately demanded Captain George set up an audience with the king of Cadenia, while, deep down, Mars quietly panicked over how on earth he'd explain this disaster to the king. Captain George then dropped some brutal news. The king of Cadenia wasn't there after all. He had to break it to Mars, and Mars went wide-eyed with surprise. George said that once the monster horde was reported, the king bolted from Moss with the royal guard. When Moss heard it, his shoulders finally dropped. At least he wouldn't have to face the king and apologize himself. In his head, he figured that if he wiped out the monsters fast enough, the king might not even notice the mess when he finally came back. Mars immediately asked if the monsters were wrecking other cities across Cadenia too, and Captain George confirmed they were, but their troops just didn't have the muscle to stop it. And that's when Mars realized how bad this really was. If the damage kept spreading, the compensation they'd promised would never cover it. He said he got what was happening and swore his forces would take care of it. Captain George just stared back, utterly baffled, insisting the kingdom of Fallon shouldn't push that far for their own good, because Cadenia still had its pride to protect, no matter what Mars said, and Mars snapped back. Doubt gnawed at them. Did they really mean to burn their own people just to save their pride? When Captain George heard it, he nodded and admitted Mars was right. Just a few steps away, Agma shouted to King Mars. The castle was safe, those monsters outside were gone, and nearly everyone that slipped into the city had been wiped out too. Captain George nearly choked on disbelief as those words hit him, because knocking down that many monsters in such a short time sounded flat-out impossible. King Mars recognized their effort and showered them with praise, but deep down, Mars was thinking the same thing. These were the kind of people who would wipe out monsters with no hesitation at all. Before long, the members of the 100 surged out to face the monsters terrorizing the rest of Cadnia, determined to wipe every last one out and make sure none slipped away, all for their king. Before Mars and his forces even reached Mas, the king of Cadenia was already spiraling. He couldn't believe how fast everything had fallen apart. Monsters had crawled in around his whole kingdom, and it felt like his realm was seconds away from total collapse. He'd planned to fire off a formal complaint to Fallon and demand they wipe out that monster's deadly threat, but frustration kept crashing through his head. What were Fallon's soldiers even doing? They swore they'd cut the monster numbers down, and the coachmen riding with him insisted the Black Knights had supposedly marched into the demon beast forest to subdue the beasts. The king's gut twisted with dread, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the Black Knights had staged the whole mess on purpose. Then a worse idea hit him. What if the kingdom of Fallon had been masterminding this from the start? Those suspicions rattled his nerves to the core, then a scream tore through the air from outside. The king yanked open his carriage door and rushed out to see what just happened. Until he stumbled upon a nightmare. His men had been cut down, every last one. Confusion and panic crushed him as he tried to make sense of it all. Then Chrome burst into view, bowed to the king, and introduced himself along with exactly what he did. The king went rigid with shock when he learned he was connected to the Black Knights, because in his eyes those knights were meant to crush monsters, not fail their vow, so he demanded answers and Chrome stayed cool, calmly insisting they hadn't broken a single promise. He told the king that the Black Knights had already mowed down most of the monsters, so by the time they showed up, the invaders were barely hanging on, yet the king was still baffled because his country was still getting hit, and he demanded to know why. Chrome then broke down one deadly truth about monsters. The stench of slain prey doesn't fade, it draws in even nastier predators. If the exterminators went in half-hearted, they'd just wake up more monsters and bring them pouring into the area, so the king of Cadenia brushed it off as pure nonsense. Defeating monsters never triggers a stampede, he insisted, like he'd seen it all before. Then Rome cut in. There was another piece to the puzzle. Then he pulled out a potion brewed by his country's alchemists, and Chrome leaned in and warned me, this stuff could lure monsters. Spread it wide and they'd come crawling, but mix it with a monster's blood and the pull goes feral, exploding in power. He said the vial had already been scattered from the demon beast forest all the way to Mas. The king froze in shock at the revelation, then blurted the details out like he couldn't believe his own ears. Did Chrome really pour out that potion to bait monsters? And then it hit him. Chrome had planned it all, deliberately kicking off the stampede. Chrome didn't flat out admit the accusation. He just leaned in with a calm grin and said, "Yeah, we took action and it sparked a full-blown stampede." Then his voice turned deadly serious and he snapped that none of this would have happened if the king hadn't let foreign knights into his own land. And those words rattled the king straight to the core. The king demanded to know why Fallon didn't just shut the request down and call it a day, but Chrome fired back that every stupid move the king ever made had already been baked into King Mars' plan. Then Chrome sprang into action to slam the situation shut. Chrome hurled the potion straight at the king's face and the king snapped, demanding to know what he was planning to do. Chrome said the potion would still work, no monster blood needed. When he saw what fate had in store, the king of Cadenia flipped into panic mode. He threw out Chrome rewards like bait, begging for loyalty in exchange for land, titles, and anything else he wanted just so he could stay alive. Life flickered, and Chrome shot his sword straight into the king's body. He told them that in their country, not a single knight would ever sell out their king for land or coin. Before long, monsters came pouring into the area like they had been summoned, closed in on the king's fallen body and started devouring it, until there was nothing left. And as the king of Kedna tried to bolt for his life, monsters tore into him and mauled him to pieces. 3 days later, the people of Caden turned up, loud and restless. Kednia poured out their gratitude to Mars, cheering because Moss was finally saved. Then they started calling him the savior of Kednia. Mars stood there in quiet disbelief because the monsters were already gone and peace had rolled back into the country without much of a fight. Honestly, that result was almost too easy to accept. Then boom, another crisis hit. and the king of Catania was dead. Sure, it meant nobody could gripe about what happened anymore, but now Mars faced a brutal new problem. He couldn't just turn around and go back to Fallon. After landing in Moss, Mars whipped the knights escorting him into monster hunting mode, sending them after the last threats, while he himself rushed to the battered cities and threw his weight behind the rebuilding efforts. During these visits, he also rained gold coins on everyone who'd been hit by it. Mars knew that dumping gold on Cadenia could set off a dangerous precedent, but he still gambled that if he did it now, the kingdom might skip the whole fight over reparations later. Mars realized the people were truly smiling, and suddenly it hit him, the money hadn't been a mistake at all. Then he tore back to Moss and reunited with the Black Knights. Chrome rushed to an official with shocking news. Cadenia's king was gone, ripped apart during a monster attack, and his body had been found along the highway in a brutal, gruesome wreck. The official boiled with anger and couldn't believe it. The fact that their king had run away just to be cut down by monsters after everything they'd endured left him shaking with rage, and the whole mess felt downright pathetic. While chaos raged, people in Cadnia started blurting that they were done living under a country like this, and some even said they'd swear loyalty to Fallon's kingdom, leaving Mars completely stunned. The crowd kept pouring in thanks, praising him for saving their lives and for every piece of gold he handed out while they fought to rebuild. Soon after, Captain George marched up to King Mars and demanded a moment of his time. George said the Princess of Cadenia wanted to meet him. Princess Rubis stayed locked inside the castle the whole time, never once running. Captain George delivered the princess's message word for word, because she'd been shaken to her core by how King Mars saved the people of Cadenia, and now she urgently wanted to meet him face to face, and King Mars agreed. Captain George added yet another demand from the princess: no leaks, no witnesses. She wanted this meeting to happen as a private dinner with only Mars himself in the room. Mars had no objections, but then he paused, because even with the secrecy locked down, he knew Frau would still hear every word through the contract Mark had forged between them. Meanwhile, Princess Rubis kept staring into the future, wondering what would happen to Cadenia next, and the truth hit hard. Their royal family had nearly drained all credibility away. Their king died in disgrace, and in the chaos that followed, people started chanting for Mars, a king from a foreign land. Word hit the streets fast. He'd showered the disaster-hit areas with gold, and that kind of generosity didn't just impress them, it won their hearts. People swore that the gold had to be the reparations the princess's own father demanded from Fallon. Princess Rubis stared at the whole mess and realized how perfectly the pieces were slotting into place, too perfectly. Fallon had agreed to those reparations way too fast, and since the very start that choice had felt wrong. Now she couldn't shake the suspicion that King Mars might have orchestrated it all, turn the Cadenia's demands against them, then quietly set the trap and trigger the. He used the chaos like a smokescreen, then launched a full-on monster stampede to smash through and invade. In her mind, King Mars loomed like a ruthless mastermind, cold, focused, untouchable. She could scream that the whole mess was Fallon's doing, but the truth was brutal. She had no proof. Without proof, the accusation would only make her look like a desperate royal with a ruined name. And even if some evidence magically surfaced, everyone already had Fallon's generosity and power burned into their heads, so they'd still refuse to believe her. King Mars crushed his foes with raw strength and razor strategy, winning the people little by little, while Princess Rubis stayed convinced she alone held the real truth. Yeah, behind his back, folks whispered Mad King, and to her, that name fit him perfectly. She couldn't shake the fear that if King Mars really tightened his grip on Cadenia, everything would go horribly wrong. And she was the only one brave enough to see that danger before it struck. For the sake of her kingdom and everyone in it, Princess Rubis gritted her teeth and knew she had to move, because she wasn't just any girl, she was the princess. And once that truth hit, her resolve hardened as she, Cannabis, made up her mind. She was going to be the one to end King Mars's life. Meanwhile, inside Cadenia's castle, a sharp voice demanded the truth. Were they really planning to assassinate King Mars? Lady Rubis nodded and snapped, "Yes, we're going to kill him." And then she laid out her chilling theory. The monster stampede wasn't an accident at all, it was probably set up on purpose. King Mars had a master plan. He wanted to swallow Cadnia whole and drag it into Fallon's territory. Lady Rubis told them the people's hearts were already drifting toward Mars and that most of southern Cadenia had slipped under Fallon's grip. If you want to save this country, she warned, then King Mars has to be taken down. Captain George slammed his fist and demanded how anyone could pull it off. because in his eyes, not a single soul in their nation could ever topple King Mars in battle. When Mars and the Knights of Hundreds stormed into Moss, they slaughtered monsters that even Cadenia's royal army couldn't beat. And to George, those guys weren't just warriors, they were living legends. Lady Rubis refused to give up. She swore there was one last play, and it was ruthless: poison King Mars. Captain George froze with pure shock when he heard the plan. He declared that Mars's wife, Lady Frau, was a monster-level magician, so if she showed up, she'd sniff out the poison with magic in seconds. Lady Rubis snapped back that the poisoning would happen the moment Mars was alone. Then she set it up: a private meal with just her and King Mars at the table. Then she leaned in and asked Captain George if he'd back her up with her plan. In her head, Lady Rubis knew this couldn't be handled casually. One wrong retaliation could wreck Cadenia. So she clenched the weight of it on her own shoulders, ready to end it all even if it cost her her life. Later at their planned dinner, Mars suddenly snapped and reacted with. He dug in with real joy, instantly recognizing the dish as traditional Cadenian court cuisine. And gratitude hit him hard, because the hospitality he'd been shown felt like a warm welcome. Lady Rubis nearly choked on disbelief. King Mars actually showed up alone with 0 guards at his side, and somehow that mistake made guilt flicker in her chest while the whole thing quietly played into her favor. In her head, she ran the plan over and over. Every dish on that table had poison slipped into it, so if Mars demanded a plate swap, she'd still have a way to survive and hit back. Once Mars devoured enough food, the poison would finally kick in. She pictured him crumpling in pure agony, coughing up blood as the poison tore him apart. Lady Rubis suddenly realized she'd never pulled off a move like this before, and the tension knotted her stomach, while Mars quietly clocked every twitch in her nerves. To him, she didn't seem like a threat at all. She looked oddly young, almost sweet. Then Mars finally spoke up, noting that it was Lady Rubis who demanded the meeting, and asking what she was really trying to talk about. Lady Rubis then leaned in and said her grandfather, Duke Gordon, ruled northern Cadenia with real power, and she couldn't help thinking that if she steered the talk toward politics, King Mars would almost certainly bite. Meanwhile, King Mars couldn't stop raving about how delicious the traditional Cadenian dishes were. As he kept digging in, Lady Rubis's nerves snapped tighter with every bite. She couldn't stop asking herself if he'd clocked the poison tucked into the food. At the same time, she forced herself to push him on, praising the meal with a steady smile and claiming every dish came out perfect. Then she leaned in, murmuring that maybe the food was just exactly to his taste. King Mars lit up with cheerful approval, clearly savoring every sharp spice like it was made just for him, and finding the flavor absolutely soul-satisfying. As he kept devouring plate after plate, Lady Rubis couldn't help but wonder who he really was, because even with poison tearing through his body, he still looked perfectly satisfied. She slipped closer to Captain George and breathed out her confusion, and George fired back in a hushed tone that the food for King Mars had been poisoned, just like they planned. Lady Rubis couldn't shake the feeling that King Mars was almost inhuman, yet the antidote she'd taken wasn't flawless either. If she kept stuffing herself with poisoned food right alongside him, she'd be walking straight into serious danger. While she wrestled with the poison, Mars was locked on his own thoughts. After dinner, he'd still have to face the political mess in Cagnia, and now, an idea started to ignite in his mind. Then he shot Lady Rubis a question: how old was she? She grinned and said, "I'm 14, and Mars practically nodded because that's exactly what he'd guessed. When he first laid eyes on Rubis, his 14-year-old younger brother swore they looked like they were the same age. In his head, Mars latched onto one bold idea: maybe he could hand Cadenia's leadership to his little brother, Nickel. Since Nickel and Rubis were the same age, he figured the two of them could team up and keep things from spiraling. When Lady Rubis heard his words, her mind went blank. Was this a marriage proposal, or was King Mars cooking up some kind of political alliance? Her suspicions spiraled fast, because if she was married to Mars' younger brother, Falun could slide in, annex Cadnia's, and take it without a hitch. That thought horrified her, like King Mars had already read their whole scheme, and every move they made was exactly what he wanted. When Mars asked what she thought, he said Nickel was sharp with politics and he was sure Nickel and Rubis would click fast. Then Lady Rubis had to refuse with laser-precise care, all while keeping perfect royal manners. But the poison was already starting to claw at her. Her head grew light, dizzy, and completely unfocused. In her head, she knew the meeting couldn't drag on. She had to grab the antidote as fast as humanly possible. Lady Rubis finally answered King Mars's suggestion, saying she'd look at it in a good light. King Mars lit up, clearly thrilled by her reply. Lady Rubis suddenly stood, made an excuse, and marched out of the room, leaving Mars staring after her, confused that the food was still untouched, as the meeting ended with zero showdown in sight. Right after that, King Mars used magic to reach Gamera S in Fallon and demanded his attention, then told him he was handing Nickel the job of running Cadnia. It caught Gamera's off guard, but he still accepted the order. As Gamera replayed the choice in his head, he came to one brutal conclusion. Mars was pushing Nickel to marry the princess of Cadnia and crown himself king of the whole country. In Gamera's head, Nickel was twisted into two roles: Mars' half-brother and also his own grandson. Because when Mars first seized the throne, Gamera had believed Nickel would be wiped out for good. Nishal didn't just stop there, he even got tangled up in the earlier assassination scheme against Mars, and somehow, Mars still spared his life. To Gamera, what just happened didn't feel accidental at all. It felt like Mars had saved Nickel on purpose, not out of mercy, but because something bigger was coming. The moment hit Gamera like lightning, pure admiration. He swore he was seeing just how deep Mars's foresight went, then he practically burst with excitement, praising King Mars to the skies and thanking him for setting up what Gamera believed was an absolute dream match for Nickel. After a while, Nickel finally caught up with King Mars and let him have it with her words, right there in front of him. He thanked them for trusting him with a responsibility that huge. Nickel vowed no matter what that he wouldn't let him down. Meanwhile, Mars kept circling the question like a storm cloud: why in the world did Nickel bring his mother too? And that whole fine match talk left him totally baffled. Still, he clocked that Nickel looked fired up at least. Then Mars snapped, "Work with Lady Rubis and give it your all." Nickel immediately pressed where Princess Rubis was. Mars told him she was somewhere inside the castle, though he'd heard she wasn't feeling well. Right there, Chrome asked if he should tag along with Nickel, and Mars nodded like, "Yeah, that makes total sense." In Mars' eyes, letting Nickel roam the castle couldn't possibly backfire, especially with Chrome there. And with that confidence, he handed the job straight to Chrome, who snapped to attention and accepted the mission. Not long after, a blood-curdling scream tore through the corridor. Chrome cut down several knights of Cadenia, then spoke calmly, telling them to back off, and demanded to know who in their right mind would try to stop the future king of Cadenia. Captain George burst onto the scene and shouted for everyone to hold back, admitting Chrome served the king of Fallon, but insisting this violence didn't need to happen. Chrome shot back that Lord Nickel had trekked all the way here just to meet his future wife, and to Chrome, that meant Captain George could at least give Nickel's request a little room to breathe. Prince Nickel stepped forward and basically ended the debate. This was already locked in. He said his grandfather Gamers and the princess's grandfather Duke Gordon had hammered out the arrangement together, and both men had actually been thrilled, even thanking King Mars for it. But Captain George snapped that it sounded ridiculous and swore Duke Gordon would never sign off on something like this. Nickel stayed cool and pressed on, saying Rubis was going to be queen of Cadenia, so honestly, how bad could that really be? Then he shifted his focus to George and warned him that exposing what the princess did to his brother would blow up in his face. Frustration flashed across George's face as he demanded to know what Nickel was hinting at, only for Nickel to shrug and say stuff like this happens everywhere, claiming people keep trying to assassinate his brother, and even he thinks those attempts are downright stupid. Nishal flashed a confident grin and swore that no ordinary folks could ever topple a real king. Chrome leaned in, kept Nickel's stance locked in place, and pushed George to finally pick a side. Because to Chrome, whether George fought back or stepped aside, the end result was going to be the same. When George finally realized he had nothing left to do, he crumbled and gave in. Then Lady Rubis burst out of her room, snapped that everything was under control, and took charge. She pulled Nicole aside and invited her into her room for a private talk, and Nicole gladly stepped in. Inside the room, Lady Rubis zeroed in on Nicole and demanded to know what Fallon really wanted from Cadenia. Nickel shot back that they didn't want anything from the country at all, just one thing: to team up and build a better Cadenia together. Rubis snapped back that Cadenia was already a solid country long before Fallon ever stepped in, and Nickel leaned in, gripped by the idea, then demanded proof. Because if Cadenia really was good, why would its people have fallen for King Mars so fast? If the kingdom had been run right from the start, no foreign power would have had a single reason to step in. Nickel then stared into the bigger question: nations exist for their people, and Rubis snapped in with the same belief. Nicol pressed further. If the people's well-being is the whole point, then Cadenia had even more reason to stand shoulder to shoulder with Fallon. And in Rubus's eyes, no ruler treated the people like his brother did, so that realization hit him like a wave of raw angst. She snapped in anger and shut the idea down hard, then she reminded him that even kids had already heard the whispers about Fallon's mad king. In those stories, wherever Mars stepped, bloodshed and death always followed. He grabbed the throne with bandits, butchered the nobility, chomped down monster flesh tainted with poison, and then built a roaring arena just to feed his own sick entertainment. Before anyone even debated whether Mars deserved the crown of king, Nicol said they had to ask one brutal question first. Could he even be called a decent person? And yeah, she admitted you couldn't fully dismiss a lot of those accusations. He also made it clear his brother had never once hurt innocent, ordinary civilians. Instead of sitting idle, he crushed nobles who ignored their people and hunted monsters that terrorized villages and towns. So the folks of Fallon rallied behind Mars, and now Cadnia's people are lining up for him too. Nicol went on to say that once the nobility got stripped away in Fallon, the whole middleman tax scam crowd vanished too. So the nation's coffers swelled, and ordinary people finally felt the weight lift off their shoulders. From Nicol's perspective, nobody in their country badmouthed King Mars anymore, and when Rubus heard that, he nearly couldn't believe his ears. Her fury melted away bit by bit, until a steady calm settled in like silence after thunder, and in her head it felt like everything she'd ever believed about Mars and Fallon shattered in a blink. Then Nicol urged her to see Fallon for herself someday, and he even sounded proud about the future person who would become his bride. She's smart, she's charming, and she's got everyone hooked. Not long after, Nicol and Rubus tied the knot in a grand ceremony, and that same day Cadenia was officially folded into Fallon's rule. Mars felt this huge relief that things between Cadenia and him had finally smoothed out. Yet he still couldn't stop himself from wondering how the two of them ever ended up married in the first place. Elsewhere, deep inside another castle, King Dorson got a humble plea at his throne. Someone begged him to help take back the kingdom of Kedna. As he listened, King Dorson stared at the royal petitioners with pure contempt, thinking they were pathetic. And if they and their dead king had even a drop of competence, Fallon would have never taken their kingdom in the first place. His thoughts snapped to the mad king Mars, because the moment Mars seized the throne, Fallon completely changed. To Dorson, Fallon used to be a weak, forgettable kingdom, until it rode the monster Stampede as a perfect cover to gobble up Cadnia in almost one night. And even if Fallon was still too small to be a real threat, its hunger to expand had finally become impossible to ignore. Dorson saw King Mars as nothing but a cocky upstart, one who'd gotten way too bold. King Dorson smiled at the royal visitors and acted like he understood, but he wouldn't ignore Fallon's aggression. The displaced royals bowed in gratitude, and while they thought everything was fine, Dorson was already cooking up his own plans in the shadows. The two royals standing before him weren't real rulers at all. They'd be puppet kings, just as the plan demanded, ready to report everything to him once Kednia was reclaimed. First, he meant to fire off a diplomatic demand: give back the throne to its rightful place. If Fallon handed over the territory without a fight, this whole mess would crack open and fix itself fast. Yet Dorson couldn't shake the feeling that Fallon wouldn't back down that easy, because in his gut, this would almost certainly explode into full-blown war, and if he won, he'd pull the strings from the shadows, letting the real heirs take the spotlight. Then once the kingdom crumbled, it didn't even faze him. His mission was crystal clear: smash Fallon's rising power before it could spread any farther. And at the same time, King Mars got hit with bad news. Someone showed up with a demand, begging that the throne of Cadnia be handed back to its rightful crown prince. Mars stared at the letter, wondering if it really came from King Dorson. Then Gamera snapped the mystery shut, confirming there was zero doubt about where it was from. Right on cue, another letter slid in too, and this one was from Nicol. The message screamed that a war with Dorson was practically locked in, and it demanded Fallon's deadliest forces be deployed. So Mars froze, completely stunned by what he was seeing. In Nichol's head, he'd always pictured himself as the quiet, bookish type, and when Mars put Cadenia under his control, Nichol figured everything would stay calm. But the truth hit hard. Mars never cared about holding Cadenia in the first place. That place was a headache, and it never even belonged to Fallon to begin with. Nichol had married the princess and crowned himself king, and Mars couldn't even wrap his head around how it all happened so fast. like the wedding was done in just a couple weeks, and now King Dorson had flipped from ally to full-blown enemy. Meanwhile, the 100 members were buzzing with anticipation again. War, to them, wasn't scary at all. It was something they couldn't wait to dive into. Warren lit up with an idea: forget waiting, flip the whole situation, and invade Dorson. He insisted Cade Nia was already shaking under Dorson's threat, and he wanted the Red Knights to charge first. King Mars heard him and looked completely baffled, snapped his gaze toward Gamera, and asked if she truly opposed war. Gamera answered with admiration, and he read the moment like it was destiny, perfectly timed for their monster army's debut, and to him, it all looked like King Mars's master plan was playing out exactly on schedule. But Mars couldn't keep up with the logic behind their reactions. Honestly, he didn't want war at all. Peace was the only answer for him. Then he stepped in and warned them not to act recklessly because charging in without thinking would change nothing. Two people instantly nodded along, insisting it all had to be planned properly. Then Mars quietly started to wonder if they were even talking about the same thing. Outside the castle, Agma lit up as his elite warriors arrived, clearly pleased. Then he brought up Dorson's demand and demanded that Cade Nia be handed over so he could be questioned. He had to know if they'd really let that insult slide, because in his own words, watching Cadenia get dragged away was absolutely not going to happen. The gathered warriors snapped back in one loud, unshakable no, and the moment hung there. They screamed that they'd flatten Dorson's thieves and make them pay by bleeding out for daring to insult him. From the castle window, King Mars stared down with rising dread, because his men had gathered without even asking him, and now they were painting Dorson as the villain, while Mars kept flicking doubts in his head. Could giving speeches on the castle grounds without permission count as aggression? Agma kept talking, hammering the point that Dorson's army was no joke. Their soldiers were razor-trained and loaded with everything they needed. He told them Dorson's army was going to crush them, 5-1, and you could see shock hit a few of the men right away. Agma snapped back on the spot, saying all it meant was simple: each of them had to wipe out 5 enemies, and to him, that made the whole thing feel almost easy. From up above, Mars stared in disbelief at Agma's logic, like she was turning war into a cold math equation. Then Agma snapped her challenge to the 100. Tell me, were any of you really so weak you couldn't take on 5 opponents? He slammed his chest and bragged that he was the strongest of the bunch, then promised that as the 100's top fighter he'd personally haul back 50 severed heads to King Zero's as an offering, and King Mars listened, frustration sparking higher and higher in his gut, because none of this was what he had in mind. Still, the other 100 guys got more and more hyped. They screamed that they'd rip off 10 heads, then 20, even 30, and swear they'd deliver every last one of Dorson's army's heads straight to King Zero. King Mars kept a calm face while panic screamed inside him as he watched everything spiral out of control. Life felt like it was collapsing right before his eyes, and he couldn't even figure out what anyone was supposed to do with a mountain of severed heads. Spinning toward Gamers, Mars argued that surely nobody wanted a war, but Gamer stayed cool and said the truth was the reverse. The people were all in and fully supportive. Elsewhere in Cadenia, the people were screaming for payback against Dorson's arrogance. Some insisted the 100 had to prove their power, while others bragged about dragging the Zeros into every corner of the continent. Hearing that, King Mars understood the council room had trapped him. No escape route remained as they debated their war against Dorson. The crowd practically buzzed with excitement for the fight ahead, and Mars kept a faint, knowing smile as he admitted, plain and simple, that there was no real escape from the war anymore. After wrestling with the reality, he finally gritted out the decision. They were going to launch the war. After that, Mars stormed over to inspect the monster mass production project. Up until now, the program ran under a mage working directly for Frau, and Mars mostly ignored it, until war started closing in and he finally decided he had to see it with his own eyes. A mage stepped up to him. She stepped forward and introduced herself as Keely, one of Lady Frau's own researchers, obsessed with studying monsters. Mars leaned in and said he'd heard she was from the mage nation of Kiel, then demanded to know why she'd come all the way to Falun. Keely told us that even though she lived and breathed magic, she believed it had one deadly flaw. She thought the nation was blind to what monster research was really worth. Small sacrifices and even collateral damage felt like the cost of progress to her, until Kiel's authorities banished her over what she called a tiny mishap, and a calm Mars only smiled, already sure of the truth. Keely had cooked up an unstable monster and it snapped, going berserk and killing people. That realization hit him hard. Keely suddenly looked like a walking disaster waiting to ruin everything. Mars shot a look at Frau standing beside him and she just gave him a casual wave. Then, even with his worries nagging at him, Mars decided to hear what she had to say next. He turned to Keely and asked how the monster project was holding up, and Keely lit up immediately, saying everything was running smoothly because building a creature like that had always been her dream. In Keel, that dream was locked behind rules, but in Fallon she finally tore those limits apart and chased it full force, throwing herself completely into the work. Mars listened in silence, but deep down he knew Keely's dream was really about forging a monster army. It clicked for him that Keel had been expelled, yet it also hit him that he'd never given her free rein to do whatever she wanted. Still, when monsters were already serving for war, food, and entertainment in Fallon, everything started lining up a little too well with the nasty reputation people had pinned on him as the king of Fallon. Then Keel dropped what she'd heard in those rumors about King Zeros. Those tales claim he seized the throne with a crew of outlaws, smashed anyone who dared oppose him, and now rules like there's no line he won't cross. So when Mars heard it, shock hit him hard because he honestly hadn't realized his name had fallen this far. He even thought the rumors painted him as a total monster. Keely, though, refused to buy it. She swore the mage community was starting to treat him like a real legend. She'd even heard wild rumors that King Mars sanctioned human experimentation, right on the grounds of magical progress. In that world, putting magic before life made people look at him like a hero, and because of that, Fallon slowly turned into a safe haven for brilliant mages who got kicked out of other nations for their wildly controversial research. Mars stayed quiet, replaying it all in his head. Those people got kicked out for brutal, unethical experiments, so why were they suddenly regrouping in Falun? At the same time, he kept it to himself. Those so-called human experiments were really Frau's doing, not his. Keely pushed on, saying their monster farming plan was finally paying off, because those near-extinct killer rabbits bounced back fast the moment the hundreds people stopped messing with them and they were actually protected. Keely couldn't believe what she was seeing. Monsters were suddenly running from humans, and it felt like a wild, shocking turn of events. Mars then pressed Keely for answers about the monster army, and she jerked her finger toward where it was. When Mars glanced that way, he froze in shock at what he saw. There stood 10 colossal beasts, and Keely snapped that they'd been stuffed with monster meat, rare top-tier chunks that made their bodies explode in size and power. Monsters hunt each other by nature, but this feast supercharged everything, and the leftovers from the earlier stampede were the secret fuel. On top of that, Keely fed the mix with special potions that drove their abilities even higher. Mars then stared and said there were only around 100 of them, too few if they were really planning for war. Keely shook her head and said these were just the core units, because the trained ones had already been unleashed and were now roaming free in the demon beast forest. Every single day, the alpha beast pushed its territory farther out while its werewolf pack multiplied the old-fashioned way, naturally. And she even told me they were weirdly kind and straight-up cute. Keely added that the alpha would still answer to King Zeros alone, and that revelation totally left Mars stunned and confused. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Why would a werewolf actually obey him? Keely's words hit like a memory coming back, and it reminded him of something that, about a year before this, Mars returned with a werewolf, shaking with terror and carved up by scars. She demanded to know if he'd beaten that creature nearly to death back then, and Mars just went quiet, like he might have really gone that far. Keely said the beast doesn't just fear him now, it worships him as the apex predator. She claimed that all it took was a threat to call Lord Zeros and the thing snapped to obedience on the spot. And somehow, from her side of the story, the whole domestication process ran smoother than anyone could have expected. She said the creature Mars dragged back wasn't just strong, it was a top-tier alpha. So now they're sitting on about 1,300 werewolves they've got fully under control, and the army is already more than ready. Mars mulled over every word he'd heard, and something about it still felt off in his bones, yet the preparations were already done, so they were ready to take on Dorson's army, and this was Fallon's first real, full-scale war under his rule. The clash was closing in fast, and deep down, King Mars wanted nothing to do with it. On the Brix plains of northern Cadnia, Dorson's invading army surged forward, while Fallon and Cadnia threw their combined forces into the fight to meet them head-on. That instant is when the clash was born. the one everyone would later call the Battle of Bricks. High above the battlefield, Dorson's mages ripped their magic into the sky. Their spells slammed into Fallon's mages' magic, and the air erupted in violent, clashing bursts of power. The Dorson mage rushed to General Kinbury and warned that Fallon's magic power hit harder than expected, then asked if they should unleash their full firepower, only to watch Kinbury stay ice calm and wave it off. In his mind, Fallon maybe had just 2,000 soldiers, while Dorson had 10,000, so their side owned a clean 5-to-1 advantage. Kinbury didn't flinch. His troops had been trained for exactly this kind of fight, where winning comes from smothering the enemy with sheer numbers. Still, one worry wouldn't leave him. Frau, the current queen of Fallon, the Thunder Empress, had been a monster prodigy since she was a kid, and her talent let her land one single strike so devastating it could flip the whole battlefield's future. To smash that threat, Dorson's mage corps kept their magical barriers up. No breaks, no wavering. They tried to grind the Fallon mages down by making them burn mana again and again, until they couldn't keep going. Once Fallon's magic got stripped away, Dorson's bigger force would crush them, but Kinbury couldn't ignore the real nightmare waiting out there, King Zero of Fallon. He seized the throne by brute force, and once they set it in Fallon's arena, they swore nobody could touch him. Then when Ketnia's monster stampede erupted, his name flew across the whole land in a blink. Kinbury couldn't shake the thought that King Zero's veins might be pumping the blood of an ancient hero, one of those God-blessed legends who could crush past every limit ordinary humans ever reach. Even so, Dorson still had a few secret tricks up its sleeve. Right next to him, a soldier snapped that Fallon's magical barrage had just cut out, like someone flipped a switch, and the second that happened, it was time to unleash the Knights of Dorson, who surged forward for. He barreled ahead and crashed straight into Fallon's forces. Then the battle erupted, and General Kinbury watched it all unfold. Fallon's soldiers wouldn't fold, no matter how many enemies crashed into them at once. Kinbury had braced for that kind of stubborn wall. Now 2,000 Fallon troops were locked up with half of Dorson's blades, easily keeping them busy. While that fight raged, Dorson still had 8,000 fresh troops pinned against Fallon's last 1,000. No matter how tough each Fallon soldier was on their own, Kinbury was certain they couldn't beat an army with those numbers. In the end, it all came down to who had more bodies. Battles don't lie, and in his mind, victory was already sealed. From his perch above the battlefield, King Zeros watched the chaos unfold, and one thing hit him instantly. Dorson's troops fought like they'd been carved into perfect order. Their lines stayed razor straight, and they kept driving the enemy into brutal odds, slamming opponents into 2-on-1, and then, without mercy, 3-on-1. Agma marched up to King Zeros and snapped that the lower ranks were reaching their breaking point against the Dorson forces. Then Zeros fell silent, staring ahead with a tense, preoccupied calm. A massive thank you went out to Adma and the rest, because they kept that line standing when everything was about to break. Even the guys way down in the 100, anyone not in the top 10, were finally getting thrown into their first real battlefield. If the top-ranked fighters had torn open with their full power from the start, the lower ranks never would have gotten a single chance to step into the fight. Zeros realized fighting monsters doesn't feel like fighting people, and arena duels don't prepare you for real war because nobody knows when the next battle will explode. So the soldiers had to master group combat now. So Commander Warren, the Red Knight, Commander Chrome, the Black Knight, and even Frau had been dragged into it, asked to hold back their attacks. The second unit finally got its chance to charge through that brutal battle. Zeros only hoped Dorson's forces would burn out, lose steam, and fall back, because if they took too much damage, the grudges would never fade. Agma snapped and asked if it was time to unleash the upper ranks, and the Zeros nodded, ordering him to swap in the fighters step by step. While the Dorson Knights smugly pushed ahead, trying to drive the Fallon soldiers back, a gigantic presence suddenly loomed behind them. The giant warrior slammed his weapon down with crushing, earth-shaking force. He smashed into the knights, sending them flying through the air like broken shields. That man was Wanfu, and when the fight started, he tore in like a one-man army, stronger than 100 men. Long ago, Wanfu was a lumberjack, pure muscle, pure power, whose rule was carved in stone: don't block, just dodge. Even though he ranked 30th among the 100, his strength was so brutal it turned every fight into a nightmare. His weapon was the blood rod, King Mars's gift, forged from a gigantic tree taken from a rare subspecies. That material was brutal, too heavy and too hard to shape for most warriors to even lift, but Wanfu didn't care one bit about any of that. When the Knights of Dorson laid eyes on him, everything in the room went cold. Some even started asking if he was really human or something monstrous wearing a human face. Inside the command tent, a Dorson officer burst in, screaming that their lines were starting to buckle and retreat. General Kinberry froze in disbelief. No way could they be turning around like this with 5 times the force on their side. This battle couldn't turn that fast. Kinberry's gut twisted with dread, and one terrifying thought hit. What if King Zeros himself had stepped onto the battlefield? A knight swore enemy elite fighters had flooded the battlefield, yet King Zero himself still hadn't shown. Still, Fallon's troops barreled through their squads, and Dorson's trusted 3-man tactical formations suddenly stopped working as his soldiers got smashed one after another. General Kimbry snapped to the conclusion that if the Zeros didn't personally step into the brawl, then these attackers had to be top brass from the 100. Then he started weighing whether he should yank his forces back. In his head, Kinberry saw it clearly. Fallon's momentum was roaring so hard that any retreat at the wrong moment could shatter the entire army. Yet if they kept throwing themselves into the clash, their lines could snap completely. So he paced through his options like every second mattered, trying to find the one move that wouldn't doom them. Just then a voice cut in, asking permission to join the battle. Kinberry nodded to the 2 warriors who stepped forward, Dorson's heaviest hitters, the reserves built for the day they might have to take on Zeros himself. They were feared across the land as the Knights of the 5 Thrones, Midius and Dundee. Mattius blurted out that he was done waiting and ready to throw down, and Kinberry let them go only to warn them to stall just long enough for the main force to slip away safe. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Wanfu reflects. He stared back on his past in Fallon's arena, where victory always slipped through his fingers. And now, on an actual battlefield, he vowed to finally prove he's unstoppable. Before Fallon's top ranks could even show up, he figured he could smash their enemies flat, and then Mattius stepped in, staring at Wanfu's massive size. Wanfu slammed the blood rod down with ruthless force, and then, crash, his stomach dropped when Mattius sidestepped it effortlessly. Someone demanded the name of his opponent right now. Mattius stepped in and called himself one of the 5 Thrones. Wanfu's eyes lit up, because that title belonged to Dorson's 5 mightiest warriors, and this meeting suddenly felt dangerous. Wanfu straightened up, told him who he was, and revealed he was with the 100, then promised he'd crush him. Then out of nowhere, blood exploded from Wanfu's head, burst from the injury, and he crumpled straight to the ground. Mattius stared at the fallen warrior, stunned by what he just witnessed. The warrior felt like he could crush this fight right then and there, but the truth hit him hard. His whole job was just to drag time and keep the enemy busy. Then he barked for the Dorson Knights to fall back, saying the job was done and that General Kinberry had ordered the retreat. Then Mattius finally looked King Zeros in the eye and called the whole thing a dead-even draw before heading out. Soon enough, Agma saw Dorson's army crumpling backward and snapped, asking if they should chase the fleeing enemy. But King Mars shook his head, ordering everyone to focus on the wounded first. In his head, Mars sized everything up. Dorson's troops had taken a brutal hit, but the damage wasn't fatal, and his own men, yeah, they just forged real battle experience that could never be bought any other way. And to Mars, ending this war without igniting even deeper hatred was the absolute best ending he could hope for. That night, deep inside the encampment, Agma snapped with frustration, saying he'd already hit his breaking point from holding back, but Chrome brushed him off, claiming the real fighting hadn't even started. And that answer lit a fuse in Agma's anger, because he couldn't stand the idea of sitting back and barking orders while everyone else did the fighting. Agma snapped his head toward Chrome and pointed out that Chrome had already yanked his sword mid-battle, and the look on his face screamed, "I'm ending this," leaving the whole squad on edge. Warren then pushed for a serious, no-holds-barred fight the very next day, and Chrome nodded in agreement, explaining that the whole plan of letting the lower ranks rack up experience was only meant for day 1. The second morning hit, Agma shot out a promise. He'd be the very first to step into the fight. Meanwhile, Frau snapped and told Mars that her patience had finally hit rock bottom. By the next day, she planned to unleash her full magic, and the moment was already burning in her anticipation. Inside the Dorson encampment, General Kimbry zeroed in on the chaos, weighing every option. Because he never once thought the 100 would fall to one lucky, decisive strike, so he had planned for every twist, stayed sharp, and never let overconfidence creep in. Yet, even with every precaution, their main force was already battered badly. And in the back of his mind he couldn't stop asking, how strong was Fallon's army really? Then a report crashed in fast saying that a supply unit racing toward their position got ambushed and erased without a trace, and Kinberry couldn't make himself believe it. Because that route runs straight through lands controlled by Cadenia nobles who'd teamed up with Dorson. For a heartbeat he feared they'd turned on them until the knight's report crushed that doubt. Then they insisted the attackers weren't human at all. Monsters tore into the unit until it got wiped out. One survivor swore every detail and Kinberry couldn't believe it, demanding proof it was real. Sure, in the southern regions a horde like that could happen, but in northern Cadnia, there was no way a monster swarm of that scale should exist. A nasty thought crept into his head. What if this whole incident was tied to Mars of Fallon? Before anything else, the ambush kicked off as the supply unit rolled down the road, Keely hiding nearby, commanding a huge pack of monsters to stay frozen until the target slid into their kill range. Then she snapped her order and they struck. The horde surged forward without wasting a second. The knights escorting the supplies froze in pure terror when the monsters crashed down on them. In the blink of an eye, the creatures ripped the soldiers to shreds, and they just watched from afar like it was entertainment. Keely watched the carnage without a flicker, counting in her head over 500 monsters under her thumb, moving in perfect sync like trained pets. And she even told them to gorge themselves until there wasn't a scrap left. At Dorson's encampment in the present, one official slammed the idea down, swearing a report like that couldn't be true. No human could possibly command that many monsters. General Kinberry shot back that they had to brace for the worst. Then he looked back at the stampede in this fresh ambush and clocked the sick pattern. The monsters always seemed to move in ways that kept handing Falun the advantage. Once the supply units got wiped out, Dorson's whole operation would be crippled overnight. So Kinberry shut the door on a fight and chose retreat, right then, before they ran out of strength to slip away. He barked orders to ready a full retreat starting at dawn, and then, right the next morning, shocking urgent news crashed in. A soldier sprinted to the general, shouting that Fallon's forces were charging forward. Kinberry's confidence crumbled on the spot as the messenger warned them. Even with the supply lines severed, Dorson still had the enemy outnumbered, but the Fallon army was already moving. Mars himself marched at the front, driving the whole charge while everything else played out behind him. Meanwhile, Mars stared into the silence and realized he never thought things would spiral this far. Last night, Agma declared that Dorson's troops were already gearing up to run, and in his eyes this was the perfect moment to carve King Mars' terrifying name into their enemies so deep they'd never dare mess with Fallon again. To Agma, the time finally hit for King Mars to step onto the battlefield himself. No hesitation, no hiding. He sat with the weight of everything, knowing they'd nearly crushed the war without leaving behind burning grudges. That was why he let Keely strike the enemy's supply unit, because if no one noticed, the damage would be clean and the peace could breathe. In his head, he'd rather solve problems without throwing raw force at them, and stopping more bloodshed was always the real target. Mars insisted he wouldn't go first to lead the charge himself, yet Warren read that move in a totally different way. Mars swore he'd held back the day before so the lower-ranked fighters of the 100 could finally earn real combat experience, but now Warren thought the king should go full force, and Mars silently realized Warren had the whole thing completely wrong. Chrome pointed out that while other countries' royals lounged safely behind their walls, King Mars charged straight into the danger, always leading from the front. To Chrome, that was what a real king looked like, and it made Mars wonder, if a king has any true purpose, why would he ever risk his life on the front lines? In his head, he couldn't believe this kind of move ever counted as a real strategy, yet even with his doubts, the 100 erupted in cheers, chanting King Mars' name like it was gospel. Right now, the 100 marching under King Mars are smashing straight through Dorson's forces, and General Kinberry can only stare, uneasy growing by the second because he can't wrap his head around why Fallon picked this exact moment to strike. Even with Dorson's supply lines choked off, they still outnumber them. Then, without warning, one of Dorson's officials barked out a warning and stared straight up, and what they saw there snatched the breath from his chest. Above them loomed the Thunder Empress. Frau launched into a blazing chant, summoning thunder and lightning with every word. Her magic rolled across the battlefield, and the mages of Dorson instantly knew they were in trouble. They slammed up magical barriers and dove for cover. Frau kept her chant going, and with every word she unleashed bolt after bolt of lightning like she was calling down divine judgment. That spell was the knockout blow that forged her title, the Thunder Empress, and just moments later she tore through the air with her magic. A brutal lightning bolt slammed out of the sky and hammered the Dorson army to the ground. Then boom, an explosion tore through the battlefield and rattled everything to the core. One of Dorson's officials caught on. The day before, Frau hadn't even come close to this power. She'd been holding back every ounce until now. Their magic barriers had stayed standing in the earlier battle, but holding them for a whole day wrecked their mage core. Now the wards couldn't stand a chance against another hit. At that exact moment, General Kinberry finally got what King Mars was planning. Mars played it cool, waiting for the exact second Dorson's defenses sagged, then he unleashed his elite force. Right away, Kinberry snapped for Mattias and Dante, ordering them to grab his personal knights and slam into Fallon's advance. No guessing, no delays, they were to meet Fallon in the open and crush King Mars. Not long after, Mattias and Dante ran straight into. On the battlefield, King Mars stared them down as the two warriors stepped forward to introduce themselves, and Mars finally showed them exactly who he was. Mars then swore he'd personally go toe-to-toe with the warriors of the Five Thrones, and he told Agma to mop up the rest of the enemy troops. Agma didn't even flinch, he accepted the command on the spot. Mattias, though, grinned through it all because Mars was clearly planning to face both him and Dante by himself. To Mattias, that sounded less brave and more arrogant, so he tightened up and got ready, then launched forward like a blur, speed that felt unreal. His moves were a blur as he unleashed a furious streak of strikes, so fast that Mars instantly saw the truth. Mattias was landing way more blade swings than anyone could possibly expect in that single moment. Mars snapped a brutal kick into Mattias and shoved him back, and in that split second Mars clocked it. Mattias was a swordsman who lived off insane speed. Then Dante surged in from behind and Mars snapped his guard up fast enough to block the blow. Strike stopped in his tracks and realized Dante's fighting style was totally different. No flashy speed, just crushing, overwhelming power, and Mars even gawked at the fact that Dante could be this strong without a single bite of monster meat. Then Mars snapped an invisible shield around himself. It left the two opponents frozen, not knowing what they'd just been hit with. Then Mars calmly shrugged off the gravity armlet and asked if either of them planned to surrender. Mattias refused and pushed back, suggesting they could just deflect. Dante's sudden strike might have surprised everyone, but Mars wasn't ready to call it. Matthias still believed the fight was a 2-versus-1. Then Mars snapped back, swore he'd stop holding back and warned them straight up, keep pushing and you'll die. And right then, Mars yanked off the gravity armlet Frau handed him. When that 5 times gravity weight vanished, his body snapped lighter and tore forward with wild speed. Mattias fumed, grinding his teeth as he wondered if Mars had really been going all out this whole time. Still, he launched forward again, refusing to bow out, locked in to keep the fight going no matter what. The very next second, Mars slammed in one thunderous hit, and blood exploded from Mattias as he crumpled to the ground, dead and gone. Dante lunged to strike too, but right before he could land the blow, Mars sliced through him and cut the fight short. Before Dante could even get a word out, his body got brutally torn in two. When King Mars hit the scene, the 100 members erupted in cheers, and across the battlefield the Knights of Dorson stared in shock as the 5 thrones crumbled to ruin. Elsewhere, Warren and Chrome barreled through Dorson's army, slicing their way forward as the fight started to look straight up doomed. General Kinberry saw it and shouted for his men to break and run, scatter everywhere, no hesitation, no looking back. In his head, the only play left was to save as many lives as he could, so they'd have a chance to claw back and fight another day. As the retreat kicked off, Agma burst onto the scene out of nowhere, slamming in with a crushing strike. He straight up murdered Kinberry right before the general could even slip away. When the battle finally went quiet, the King of Dorson got the report and it hit like a hammer, a crushing defeat. Almost 70% of their forces were wiped out and the war couldn't go on. With that kind of devastation staring him in the face, the king made his move. They were going to sue for peace. Right then, a stranger girl surged into view and faced the king head-on, declaring peace was pointless because she'd personally slaughter King Mars. Her presence was so intense it made the air feel heavy, and the only question left was, just how terrifyingly strong was she? Carmilla heard that Fallon was where folks chowed down on monster meat, so she pushed for the truth and asked the guy traveling with her. He nodded and said people swore it gave demonic power, which Carmilla flat-out mocked as ridiculous. She didn't care about shortcuts because she believed real strength only comes from proper discipline. With that fire in her heart, she stared straight ahead, determined to prove the uncivilized weren't powerless at all. because she knew her own noble strength was the real deal. Meanwhile, in the royal castle's training yard, Yamato was throwing down in sparring drills against King Mars. Yamato charged ahead and unleashed the Mirage Sword technique, cutting through the air like a lie turned real. King Mars watched the strike come in blazing fast, but he knew the real battle was in defense. Every move had to be razor precise and so minimal it barely existed, because even the tiniest opening could be ripped apart in an instant. Yamato stared at King Mars' swordplay, stunned that every single strike got shut down, right on cue. King Mar then let out a look of impressed disbelief, realizing Yamato had truly copied the Mirage Sword, the same technique that Mattias of Dorsen's 5 thrones had used in the recent battle. After King Mars crushed 2 of Dorsen's 5 thrones, those so-called banners of martial dominance, Dorsen's spirit collapsed and the fight drained right out of him. Their interception unit got smashed to pieces, and when their retreating forces got chased by 100, most of their troops were wiped out. After that brutal battle, King Mars straight up told Agma to stand down, knowing that if they kept charging, Dorsen's army would be wiped out completely. Agma understood the logic. Agma weighed letting a few survivors slip away, because if witnesses lived, King Zero's fear would spread even farther. King Mars realized the plan was off the mark and barked, "Stop the pursuit!" The attack had hit harder than anyone expected, and now it was obvious Dorsen wouldn't be able to rile up Fallon like that again. Back in the present, King Mars stared and realized Yamato didn't just copy Mattia's sword skills, he also nailed Dante's Earthbreak, and Yamato confirmed it himself. Yamato was sitting at the 100's 4th rank, then told King Mars the secret. Once he understood what a technique was really doing underneath, he could recreate it at will. King Mars nodded and said this was real talent. Mastering a technique after seeing it just once was pure genius. Yamato brushed off the compliments fast, insisting he didn't deserve any of it. He bowed so low in pure respect, fully knowing that without the power King Mars granted him, he'd never have climbed to this level before his time ran out. Yamato didn't start out with some magical gift for fighting. His physical skills were pretty much average from day one. He stuffed himself with monster meat until his body screamed for more, tearing it down again and again to forge himself into something stronger, until that brutal grind finally let him master high-level sword techniques. His eyes locked onto that blade like it was destiny, and then he actually managed to copy the sonic blade, a trick only the elite 100's top ranks are supposed to wield. So King Mars handed him that wartime mission: go watch the battles of the 5 thrones up close. As the days dragged on, the fighting finally fizzled out, and the whole world went eerily quiet. King Mars begged for that peace to last, and then, right at the castle gates, a mystery visitor showed up, only for the guards to block her, grill her on who she was, and demand to know why she'd come. Carmilla answered with deadly confidence, certain everyone already knew her name, then dared the guards to explain how they could possibly not recognize her, yet they kept pressing, asking who she was meeting and insisting the appointment had to be confirmed. She shot back that she had no appointment at all. He'd just shown up on a whim, determined to swing by King Zero's. Then she leaned in, dropped her name, and declared she was from the Dorsen Kingdom, the very one sitting among the 5 thrones. One guard laughed at her outfit, and the other snapped at her to get out. Carmilla clocked their attitude as stiff, rough, and totally unpolished. Without even pausing, she snapped her fingers and hurled a wind spell that tore into the guards went airborne and tore the gate open by force. Reinforcements raced in, firing off demands for her name and trying to stop her cold before she could press forward. With one savage swing, Carmilla dropped a guard in an instant and the rest froze in terror, because they recognized her move as a sonic blade. She didn't even bother to pull out a weapon, just flicked her fingers and unleashed the attack, and watching that last guard flinch only made her irritation flare. She cut him off mid-sentence, ended his life, and then wiped out every last reinforcement. They crumpled with terrifying ease like paper in a storm, so Fallon's knights in her eyes didn't have the strength to stand a chance until a voice snapped, "Stop." Bled, captain of the Blue Knight Corps, bared her authority and demanded to know who the speaker really was. Carmilla looked at the mess like it was just another headache. Then she introduced herself and let slip that she was the 3rd of Dorsen's 5 thrones. Then she ordered Bled to shut down every feud and clear the road. Because she wasn't here for anything else, she was coming straight to meet King Zero. Bled quickly clocked it. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill fighter, she was the real deal, a top-tier threat. And with him ranked 10th in the 100, he strode in with total confidence, his stance screaming that no one was dragging him down easy. Carmilla stared at him with sharp disdain, totally unmoved by his cool composure, and without a second thought she drew up a sonic blade and fired it. Bled snapped into action immediately. Carmilla noticed as he braced his guard and snapped up a block to shut down the attack. She clocked that he was way more capable than anyone expected, and then she spotted his shield, recognizing it instantly as mithril. Bled caught the technique instantly and realized just how wild it was for her to unleash a hit that brutal with barely any charge time. He didn't flinch, standing his ground behind the shield King Mars had handed him. In the demon beast forest, he uncovered this item and carried it like a badge of pride, but Carmilla hated the shield from the second she saw it. She swung right into another sonic blade. Once again, Bled slammed the block down instantly, no hesitation at all. She snapped out of the back and forth, sick of him playing defender nonstop. Bled knew all too clearly that her only move, defense, would never carve a win, not from her point of view. And he didn't plan to sit back and do nothing. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged ahead and smashed a shield bash into his target. Carmilla slipped it perfectly, but even that near miss still told her the attack packed enough raw force to slice clean through skin. Sure, it missed, but Bled didn't stop. He shoved forward again, sprinting straight at her with that same unstoppable, crushing force. Carmilla snapped her weight off the surrounding wall and shifted her position mid-fight. Her motions snapped into action. She bounced off the impact just to slip away from him again. As she watched his attack unfold, she spotted something wild. No matter how hard he hit, that wall didn't crack or budge. It clicked in her head. Bled wasn't just striking, he was steering his motion, pouring mana into the movement like a precision break. His fighting style was pure power and lightning speed, blasting out brutal hits. One clean strike would have crushed her for sure. But the moment he never landed, all that raw force became useless. Bled's frustration kept exploding as every strike clanged off empty air. Carmilla didn't even blink. They laughed at his efforts and showed him, point by point, just how nothing he did ever changed a thing. His straight-shot approach didn't hit the mark, and she felt his moves fall flat, until disinterest fully took over and the fight stopped being fun. Carmilla cut through the space and stopped right in front of Bled, staring him down at arm's length. She saw he was earnest and decent, sure, but she also found him dull and empty, and she openly mocked the fact that no one had ever told him so. Before the Blood even had a chance to react, she vanished in a blink, and then right behind him she was suddenly there. She clocked his inexperience in more ways than one. In that exact moment Bled snapped to it, he was in serious trouble. But it was already too late. Carmilla slammed in from behind and drove her strike straight into him. The punch connected and blood instantly spilled, but he yanked himself back on his feet instead of crumpling, and that move totally threw Carmilla off guard. She snapped to the truth in an instant. The hit didn't end it like she'd planned, and the realization burned in her mind. She should have shattered his spine. She called him stubborn to his face, amazed he was still upright after that brutal hit. While he bled, he didn't buckle one bit. Then Carmilla bragged about the men she'd knocked down on her way to the castle, assuming they were already dead. But Bled's stance and unshaken composure screamed the truth. They were still standing, and he trusted the 100 to survive anything, because that kind of damage wasn't enough to drop them. Their training was brutal as hell. If attacks like that could kill them, they'd have been wiped out ages ago. Carmilla's face flickered for a moment as it clicked, because under normal circumstances, Bled should have already been done. The thought that they could take something that brutal sent her back to the days when they swallowed dangerous stuff and lived pure grit, the kind she only ever saw in something crude, savage, and unbreakable. Then it hit her, if Bled didn't go down like they planned, this whole thing could spiral out of control fast. But Bled refused to budge, treating her confidence like just empty bravado and acting like he knew her plan better than anyone. Carmilla brushed off his every attempt, treating his resistance like a pointless stall that changed nothing at all. Then bam, something cut in. An unseen force slammed toward her out of nowhere, and she had to react on the spot. Carmilla just barely dodged the attack at the last second, realizing that if that shot had landed, her body would have been ripped clean apart. Just then, Yamato burst onto the battlefield and everything changed, because he showed up only after the Blue Knight Corps had held the line long enough to buy him that moment. Carmilla felt the power lurking behind him and snapped, "Who are you really?" Yamato stepped forward without a tremor, claiming he was the 4th rank of the 100 and that he wielded a sword. Fallon's swordsmanship instructor finally stepped onto the scene, and with his arrival, the whole fight shifted into its next brutal phase, because he was gearing up for the confrontation waiting right ahead. Bled's heart jolted when his sensei suddenly showed up out of nowhere. The battlefield flipped in an instant, and Carmilla, barely escaping that first strike, felt the chill of how close she'd been to getting ripped apart as she snapped her focus to Yamato, sizing up the opponent now in front of her. Sure, he was a sword instructor, but from where she stood, he didn't look like someone who could actually intimidate her. Right then, it hit her she hadn't even introduced herself yet, but that thought got cut off fast. Yamato already knew exactly who she was, and right away he confirmed it, Carmilla. She spoke with total confidence, and Carmilla answered with a small, knowing smile, realizing Yamato was sharper and more clued in than anyone she'd met yet. Yamato clocked her reputation on the spot, calling her the Mad Princess of Dorson, a name he'd heard 100 times. Then the second Carmilla heard it, her smile vanished and the amusement drained out of her face. She found that nickname brutally disrespectful, and Yamato didn't waste a second. He broke down the whole story. Her brother had grabbed the throne, and that move stripped her of her royal status, dropping her into one of the 5 heavenly ranks. Yamato, who'd run a dojo for years, had heard whispers about terrifying power, and her name kept getting brought up again and again. Everyone expected her to guard the royal family's dignity, but she broke the rules wide open, swung her power without holding back, and cut down anyone who angered her on the spot, until that ruthless streak became the very name people knew her by. He pressed on, saying her name had sunk so low that nobody would dare marry her, and that the king basically had no choice but to shuffle her into the 5 heavenly ranks. Carmilla just stayed quiet, soaking up every word like she couldn't afford to miss a beat. Yamato didn't let it end there. He laid out that she had shut down both mage training and knight training, so her magic wouldn't work right and she wouldn't even try to learn swordsmanship, yet she still called herself a magic swordsman, even with 0 real mastery in either skill. And when Bled heard the whole blunt truth, he froze, totally thrown off and scrambling for what to say next. Yamato kept talking in this calm, half-amused way, saying that no matter what people claimed about her, her strength couldn't be denied, and that was exactly why nobody could handle her anymore. That truth had turned into her reputation. As those words hit the air, Carmilla's irritation kept climbing, burning hotter with every second. Yamato then casually asked what was wrong, like she might have just been cold, until Bled watched her face and realized it wasn't chill at all, it was anger. Carmilla's smile vanished, cold seriousness snapped into place as her eyes locked on him and she vowed to end him. Bled's gut twisted the moment she stepped in, while Yamato stayed ice calm, acting like he had nothing to worry about. Without warning, Carmilla ripped a sonic blade through the air and aimed it dead at Yamato. Yamato clocked the technique at once. This one screamed magic, not skill, then stared in disbelief as those sound waves somehow sprang from a simple finger snap and got blasted bigger by magic, and when the attack finally surged toward him, he sliced through it clean in one swing, scattering it instantly, and Carmilla's face said it all. She hadn't expected that at all. Yamato kept picking apart her technique, insisting that if she truly wanted pure power, a proper incantation would have crushed harder, while the way she cast only burned magical energy for nothing, relying on raw talent with no real polish. Carmilla snapped back instantly and her fury was impossible to miss. She slammed in with a fresh strike hard enough to rip the earth open, and Yamato dodged it with effortless ease. Carmilla's rage flared hotter because no one had ever talked to her like that before, and now she was fully set on killing him for good. Even with a calm face, Yamato lined up her attack with the Earthbreak technique, and snapped that if the Blue Knight Corps had taken hits at that kind of power, it would totally explain how they got crushed so fast. So when Bled heard him, she realized the blows they'd faced earlier didn't even come close to what was being unleashed now. Carmilla snapped her attention to that title they used on her, Furious, and she couldn't remember ever hearing a name like it before, because the idea of being branded that way made her stomach twist. Yamato's answer only sharpened her anger since he made it clear the name didn't come from him at all, but from what everyone else thinks, and somehow that explanation hit even harder. Deciding she was done holding herself back, Carmilla dug in her stance and her sword flared to life. Bright lights swarmed around the blade as she went from fighting to serious business. Yamato instantly clocked the move. It was the rumored magic sword, a weapon made from pure magic forged to replace a real blade. At the same time, Carmilla's gaze snapped into something wild, her pupils shifting into an uncanny shape. Yamato watched and it clicked. She was chanting from the marks carved into her fan, using it like a staff to supercharge her spells. Then, out of nowhere, Yamato felt his body twist and lurch, suddenly weighed down by a heavy, terrifying feeling that hit him before he could even react. He snapped to it in an instant. This wasn't just anything, it was a magic eye, and Carmilla grinned, confirming he'd pushed her far enough to finally bring it out. Yamato stared it down and snapped that it was tied to gravity. Then the pressure hit like it had doubled, crushing him as he pushed through. Carmilla didn't need to be told what it did. She knew every brutal detail of her own power. Sure, it looked small, but against a swordsman it was deadly. And only the leader of the 5 heavenly ranks had ever survived it before. With that advantage in her pocket, she charged straight ahead. He barrels forward, closing the gap, hell-bent on ending this fight for good. Right as she surged in, Yamato shot into action at the last second, snapping her defenses up and intercepting the hit. Then the clash erupted instantly, and Carmilla froze in shock. He actually blocked it under those brutal conditions. She reeled back a step, eyes wide, and stared at him like he'd just pulled off the impossible. When Yamato's strike didn't land, he barely even flinched, like he was testing the limits of what could happen. Carmilla, visibly rattled, couldn't believe he was still moving while her magic eye was supposed to trap him. Then she watched closer and the truth hit her. She clocked every move as pure genius. Illusion tricks fused with slick sword footwork that made it look like he'd vanish and pop back in place, like some real-life mage instead of a fighter. Yamato's stance and answer made it crystal clear. This technique moved like a true swordsman's style, and Carmilla couldn't swallow that at all. Her explanation didn't fix the real problem at all. What freaked her out most was this. Her magic eye, supposed to slow him down hard, barely seemed to slow him at all. Then Yamato finally spilled the real reason. He'd already ripped off the bracelet he was wearing. That statement slammed into Carmilla's brain. She couldn't figure out how a bracelet could possibly cause a change that big. Yamato flat out explained, that was a prisoner's bracelet, an evil device that cranks gravity up to double force and crushes the wearer's body with it. When Carmilla heard it, her stomach dropped, because something for prisoners sounded like a nightmare waiting to happen, and it only got worse when she realized Yamato wasn't forced to wear it at all, he chose it. She couldn't wrap her head around how anyone could live with that kind of restriction, not even for training. But Yamato saw it totally different. Right to him, it was just another way to keep training, even during normal days. Even among the top tiers of the 100, this kind of thing wasn't some rare oddity at all. He pushed on and spotted a bracelet on King Zero himself, packed with an even harsher effect, so he knew for sure the king's power was simply overwhelming. Carmilla couldn't shake the feeling that this kind of behavior was one step away from straight-up madness. From her side, it felt hopeless. Living like that just wasn't right. Yamato didn't argue with the truth of it, but to him, that life was the very thing driving their pursuit forward. Everything boiled down to power, and King Zero stood right at the top of the mountain, while anyone at Carmilla's level couldn't even come close. Right then, it hit Carmilla. King Zero wasn't there at all, and that shocking absence made her snap her mind back and reevaluate everything. Right then, Bled snapped out, furious and fed up. He demanded to know why Yamato shoved himself into the way instead of letting the intruder get pushed back. To Bled, as a knight, stepping aside for an enemy to press forward or hesitating to stop them was the exact opposite of what duty demanded. Carmilla went deadly quiet for a split second. Then it hit her, this whole mess felt pointless, and she decided to cut her losses, turn around, and head straight back home. Yamato shut that down fast. His presence made it crystal clear. She wasn't walking away that easily. Carmilla's face tightened as she stared at him, instantly sensing his intent had shifted. Yamato laid out the whole story. Prime Minister Gamers had ordered him to seize her. Since she was royalty, killing her would blow everything up, so he'd been ordered to grab her alive, and that's exactly where he stood in the chaos. He was focused on what he thought he understood. Then he watched her in that fight, and even he froze because attacks that should have landed kept slipping away, and he knew right then something was seriously off. Yamato didn't just follow orders, he made his own choice, and no matter what was demanded, he refused to let her walk away. Then he pushed forward with full commitment. Carmilla slammed the gap to reach her face-to-face and steadied herself with iron confidence. The thought of being captured alive made her blood boil, like they were counting her out, even though she hadn't taken real damage yet. As Yamato lunged forward, a storm of rapid attacks crashed toward her, and her eyes went wide as she scrambled to handle the sudden pressure. Yamato started snapping the pieces of the whole puzzle into place. He realized Carmilla's dress wasn't normal at all. It messed with your eyes like it was bending what you saw and even the pounding of her footsteps fell into place, matching that creeping unease he'd felt all through the fight. And the shoes on her feet weren't just shoes, they were magic weapons. The dress and shoes threw off her balance, jumbled her sense of space, and twisted depth perception so badly that it was impossible to spot exactly where she'd move next. Carmilla locked eyes with him and started wondering what kind of man he really was. The longer the fight dragged on, the more they pulled apart her strategies. She pondered whether spilling those details would make her seem tactless, but she didn't back down. She stayed sure of herself. Even if he got how her powers worked, beating them still wouldn't be easy. You'd have to brawl with your eyes useless, no sight at all, just pure instinct. Yamato steadied himself and made it crystal clear. This condition wasn't going to break him, because he could fight like a monster even without relying on his eyes or his hearing. Carmilla couldn't buy it for a second. She clung to one desperate thought that he wasn't really being serious about that claim. Yamato told him that every near-death clash with King Zero had honed his instincts to a razor edge, so sharp he could feel his opponent's presence without needing normal sight at all. Carmilla tightened her grip on her weapon as it clicked in her mind. Techniques were supposed to keep someone from dying, yet he'd learned them by constantly flirting with death. To her, that kind of thinking made zero sense. It shoved reason aside and left her convinced logic didn't stand a chance with them, like they were all missing something deeply human. The smallest spark of Annie's started to leak into her expression as she paused, pressing him with wary questions, and then the terrifying thought hit her hard. What if he was actually planning to kill her? She tried to prove she still ruled as a royal of Dorsen, but Yamato just stood there, calm as ever, showing that killing her wasn't what he wanted. Still, he admitted something shocking. He'd never fought with the goal of capturing someone alive. He admitted he might lose control and accidentally kill her, then told himself he could fix it with an apology afterward. That answer only shoved deeper fear into Carmilla's chest, because an apology meant nothing in the middle of chaos. Then, right away, the ground around them ripped open as the clash got even worse. Sometime later, King Mars stomped back from the arena and found his kingdom in total ruin. The castle's floors and pillars were smashed to pieces, and he stood there staring in shock, frantically trying to figure out who dared to do it. Yamato and Gamera were right there, standing tall as they grabbed him on the spot. King Mars snapped his focus downward. Seeing the captive girl, he leaned in hard, determined to figure out exactly who she was. Gamers cleared everything up, spotting the restrained person as Carmilla, the ex-princess of the Dorsen kingdom, now sitting at number 3 among the 5 heavenly ranks. King Mars went quiet as memory hit him. He'd heard of her before, and he instantly clocked her as the infamous Mad Princess. Gamera laid it all out. Carmilla had shown up, swaggering in like she had business with King Mars, even asking about a scheduled meeting. But King Mars shut it down hard, saying no audience was ever on the calendar. Gamera kept talking, saying Carmilla slipped into the castle without permission, launched hostile strikes with one clear aim, to dethrone King Mars and seize the very top of the 100. The report made it sound like she wasn't just here, she wanted to be the next king of Fallon. And once Mars heard that, he didn't treat her like a guest at all, he saw an assassin. Still, he thought sending her back to Dorsen would be the easiest fix, until Gamera stepped in with a savage idea: keep her as a hostage, not a passenger, and King Mars shifted his focus to the plan Gamera was brewing. At that moment, Yamato stepped in with his own plan, pushing the idea that Carmilla should train under his watch. King Mars didn't see this proposal coming. It hit him like a shockwave. Yamato snapped that Carmilla blew off proper training and leaned on her raw talent way too much, and he called it a disaster, not just for her but for the whole realm since her gift was getting wasted. Then he declared that if she trained alongside the 100, her power would skyrocket, and he fully planned to lock her into a brutal regimen under his own watch. It would start the moment her body began mutating on monster meat, and once she finally adjusted, she'd be left to rot deep in the magical beast forest, no one coming to save her. She pushed for a cruel gamble, live or die, and King Mars saw it instantly for what it was: torture disguised as training. He refused the idea with a cool head, saying even if Carmilla got stronger, she'd still be royalty from a rival nation. And why waste power on someone who might turn into your enemy again? He glanced at Gamera for a sure answer, and Gamera backed him up, agreeing with that exact concern. So Gamera pushed a bold idea: turn Carmilla into an ally instead. King Mars mulled it over, and you could practically feel a smarter plan click into place. Then he leaned in and demanded to know what approach the cameras were cooking up. Then the gamers jumped in with a no-nonsense plan: tell King Mars to marry her. The suggestion left King Mars and Carmilla staring, completely stunned.